This is Earl Nightingale with the first issue of Direct Line. The purpose of this new program is to explore ideas, the best ideas from the past and present as they pertain to you and me and the mystery of our lives. Ideas about people, why they do the things they do, and why they don't do some of the things they could do. Why they live the way they do, believe the way they do, work and play the way they do. Our most distinguished and eloquent researchers in the field of psychology and psychiatry tell us that our affluent society has not brought us happiness and joy. On the contrary, people in the highly developed, wealthy nations of the world seem to be suffering from a malaise made up of boredom, apathy, and general depression. And we know that people are at their best, that is, they seem to be happiest and most energetic, when they're striving toward the fulfillment of what seems to them to be good and worthy ideas. Isn't that true? People move mountains and dance and sing far into the night when they're swept up by a great idea. There's something about the human creature that makes him godlike when he's moved by a great idea, and apathetic, bored, and depressed when he's not. Wherever you find boredom, you'll find the absence of a good idea, in a child or an adult. People are depressed and bored when they know deep down in the very fibers of their being that the life they're living is not what it could be, not what it ought to be. We suffer from an all-pervading feeling of guilt when we're living below our true capacities in our work and in our play. And it's beginning to dawn upon the people everywhere that we've been chasing a mistaken concept of what success is all about. We've confused means with ends. We'll find success, each of us in his own way, when we find ourselves, and when we do, all things that we want and need will be added to our lives. The journey of self-discovery, the journey into meaning, is the most exciting on earth and the most rewarding. When we're gripped by a good idea, a succession of good ideas really, because one leads to another, we're at our best, our happiest. We may not know that we're happy, but we are, and our lives are characterized by a feeling of worth, of purpose. Ideas bring the fresh, clean air of renewal into our lives, into our home lives, into our business lives. The real fun of life is in continually bridging the gap which lies between where we are and where we want to be, and from what we are to what we wish to become. There are three main departments of living with which we should concern ourselves and in which we should succeed. They are, number one, our family lives. Number two, the way we spend our days, on the job and off. And number three, our income. The purpose of this program is to help us find more meaning, more real success in each of these vital departments. First, just a word about listening. You know, when we listen, and especially to information that involves us personally, our minds only pay attention to what we're hearing until something we hear triggers an idea in our minds. Now, at that instant, our minds tune out and concentrate on the new thought. It's like lifting the tone arm on a record player. We no longer hear anything, but the record keeps turning. Now, when you hear something in direct line that sparks an idea, you tune me out for whatever time you devote to the idea. You'll do this repeatedly. The next time you listen, you'll tune out at different times. Because of the way we listen and because our attention will dart from what we're hearing to what we're thinking about, it's necessary to hear a spoken message several times just to hear it for the first time. And even weeks, months, or years later, it will spark new ideas. So if it's convenient, stop the player whenever you want to think about something you hear. Perhaps you want to make a note of what you've heard or think about it for some time. Then, when you're ready to resume, start the player again, and so on. If you're driving your car or if the whole family's listening, that might not be practicable. But even with stops and starts, repeated listening is necessary to make what you hear a part of your way of thinking and doing things. Unfortunately, we don't learn much from something we read only once. If it were printed, it would take time away from other things. In audio form, it can be listened to while we're doing other things, such as commuting to and from work, while traveling on business calls, while dressing, having breakfast, while relaxing after a long day, and so on. Moreover, in this form, it can be heard by all members of the family. If it were only in printed form, it's unlikely that it would be read by more than one, two at most. Another important reason for the cassette tape is that listening is our most effective and effortless way of obtaining information, the most natural way to learn anything. We learned by listening for many years as children before we learned to read. You see, we pluck ideas from speech as we might catch fish from a flowing river. We're not even conscious of the words being used. We listen for ideas. And that's what this program is all about. We learn to read by listening. And for most, reading remains something of a mechanical process from which ideas must be constructed. And finally, the spoken word carries so much more interest and flavor, so much more meaning, and an emotional impact impossible with the printed word. Well, let's begin with this great thought. It has appeared in many forms in man's literature, but I believe it was Emerson who put it best. Nature magically suits the man to his fortunes by making these the fruit of his character. We might experience some difficulty in finding out what we're really like by trying to look inward, but we have only to look about us at our fortunes, for they are the fruit of our character. The late Dr. Maslow, former president of the American Psychological Association, said you judge a person the same way you judge an apple tree, by his fruit, by what he produces. Do you go along with that? It's hard not to, isn't it? Well, what is character? My Random House on a Bridge says character is the aggregate of features and traits that form the apparent individual nature of some person or thing. My Oxford English Dictionary gives as its first definition a distinctive mark, impressed, engraved, or otherwise formed, a brand, a stamp. Any person who has had the chance to live as an adult for any appreciable length of time begins to collect about him what we can call his fortunes. They represent a merciless mirror of him as a person. They reflect his nature and constitute, in total, a distinctive mark, a brand, a stamp. Just as you can tell the name of a fruit tree by examining its fruit, you can tell a great deal about a person in the same way. And we can tell a great deal about ourselves. We surround ourselves in an environment, in circumstances, as Professor Jose Ortega y Gasset used the word, which reflect us, and which include our true beliefs. No matter how loudly we talk about what we believe in, our circumstances reflect our true beliefs. They show to others what is important to us. They reflect our degree of maturity at any given stage of our lives. You see, our fortunes are simply the sum total of what we want and believe we are qualified to receive at any given stage of our lives. For our fortunes should change. They should not just accumulate as we get older, they should change in quality. Change to reflect the changing person. If they do not change, it is an indication that we are not changing. If they do not grow in quality, it's an indication that we are not growing and maturing as persons. Our fortunes are the fruit of our character, and our character changes. Someone once said to Dr. Robert Hutchins when he was chancellor of the University of Chicago with regard to adult education that you can't teach old dogs new tricks. To which Dr. Hutchins replied, human beings are not dogs, and education is not a bag of tricks. We can grow through knowledge with good ideas, and as we grow, our worlds will change to reflect our growth. We outgrow our old selves and shake them off like stiff cocoons, no longer big enough to contain us, and that's as it should be. That's the way a person, a family, an organization of any kind should grow. We might say that a person, or an organization, will grow in proportion to two main conditions. The first concerns his degree of receptivity. Are his windows open to the fresh breeze of renewal in the form of new ideas and creative thinking? Many persons, in organizations are closed systems. They've got their windows closed and locked, apparently in the belief that they're already the repository of all useful information. We can all name such persons and such organizations, some quite large, but shrinking. The one thing that always typifies a closed system is that it ultimately begins to shrink, and it will eventually die if it stays closed long enough. Any person or persons making up the management of any sort of organization who feel no need for new ideas, or who do not challenge their own beliefs from time to time, are on the road down toward stagnation and decay. And the second condition governing a person's or organization's growth will be determined by the source or sources of ideas. Now, if our ideas come to us only from those by whom we're habitually surrounded, those who live much as we do, we'll tend to do little more than reiterate and fortify the ideas we already live by. That's also true in an organizational sense. A person can be said to be an organization, indeed a highly complex organization. Like any other sort of organization, the overall success will be determined by the quality of management. Just as the success of any business or other organization depends for its success or failure upon its management, so does the success or failure of a person depend upon the way he manages himself. We're all units of production. We produce things and words and attitudes which reflect our management. And the quality of our product, our total product, will be determined by the quality of our own self-management. Now, we can determine the quality of our overall product by simply assessing what we're being paid for it. It's true for a person, or for a business firm, or any sort of organization. And we might say the quality of our management will be determined by the quality of our ideas. The main ideas of our lives are the main roads on which we travel. So where do we get most of our ideas? When you ask about the extent of a person's education, you must ask, who were his teachers? We need to ask ourselves the same question. We can change, we can grow, and as we change and grow, our fortunes will reflect that change and growth. That our character is the architect of our fortunes is an interesting idea, isn't it? It's so interesting that it could bring about a significant change in our way of living. It could modify or completely change our goals in life. It gives us a way of assessing the quality and the importance of the product we're producing in each of our important divisions. Let's say a company has 3 divisions. 2 are doing well, 1 is losing money. Now, the one that's losing money, provided it's been losing money for some time, would seem to indicate that it has poor management, or else it produces a product or service without sufficient demand on the part of those it would serve. Now, the same can be said to be true of the different departments of our lives. Quite often a person will be great in one department and poor in another. Great on the job and making a living perhaps, but poor at home, or great at home and poor on the job. I think we can safely say that every relatively normal person wants to succeed in each of the 3 main departments of living. In his family life, in the way he spends his days, that is, the work he's chosen and the way he chooses to spend his free time. It's surprising, how many people tend to forget that they chose their work of their own free will, just as they chose their spouses of their own free will, and the main direction of their lives of their own free will. And we all want to succeed in the income department. That is, we want an income sufficient to fulfill our wants, not just our needs, but our wants as well. Now, we control our rewards in each of these departments. If we've been adults for any real length of time, and if we've achieved any real maturity, we must admit to ourselves that our rewards in each department are commensurate with our management, with our success in interacting with those upon whom our success depends. Now, that's an idea we will accept or reject, depending upon whether our windows are open or closed. I mentioned earlier that we often confuse means with ends. For example, an automobile is a means to an end. It's a means of getting from point A to point B. Money is a means to an end. It's the means to the kind of life we want to live. It represents financial security now and in our later years. It represents good health, education, travel, a good home, and so forth. Now, in our society, these means to ends and others have often been confused with ends. The automobile, or money, in itself has become an object of veneration, not for what it will do for us to make life more convenient and more pleasurable, but rather for what it is in itself. We tend to worship objects in our society. And finally, we find ourselves in possession of all the objects we ever wanted, and we stand in the middle of them and look at them and come to the realization that they're not enough, not nearly enough. A human being needs more, much more than a pile of objects, important as some of them are. And that's one of the reasons we find so much depression, so much boredom and apathy about us. People have what they wanted. Why aren't they happy? Could it be that they've not moved on to other, larger, and more worthwhile goals? I think so. George Bernard Shaw said that it is the first duty of every man not to be poor. I agree with that. Poverty has never brought happiness. We see it staring from the hunger-ravaged faces of the world's underprivileged. We see it in our ghettos. But there are 2 kinds of income, psychic and tangible. Now, psychic income is the income of the mind and feelings, the kind we get when we look at our loved ones or when we've done a good job. Psychic income is the income the firemen get roaring through town with the sirens screaming. It's the income a police officer knows when he straps on his revolver and assumes the authority of his uniform. There's psychic income that comes with a promotion, with the executive suite. It's excitement and satisfaction, and it's perhaps the most important income we receive from our life's work. We can make a living, we can get rich doing many things, but psychic riches come from being in the kind of work we like, doing the things we want to do. Konrad Lorenz, in his excellent book, On Aggression, tells us that the drive to fulfill oneself to realize, if possible, the potential of one's unique endowment is coded in our genetic instructions. And it's going contrary to our genetic instructions that causes us anxiety, guilt. We seem to know that there's a way to live that's better than the one we're settling for. Now, families, schools, society all work to fit us into established pigeonholes, and for some it's fine. For others, the shoe doesn't fit. It hurts. It rubs and chafes and can become agonizingly painful. No psychic income there. So those must seek it off the job in hobbies and avocations, or change the job. But we need to get it somewhere. Psychic income is an important part of our income picture. As to financial income, it should meet our requirements. What those requirements are is a matter of individual taste. Our income should be sufficient for us to live in the style we most enjoy, have the things we think are important, do the things we want to do, see the places we want to see, and perhaps help others who didn't manage or couldn't manage to work it out for themselves. In a society such as ours, it can be said that not every person can find the kind of gainful employment that forms a perfect fit with his aptitudes, likes, and dislikes. Many factors work to hold a person in a particular place and at a particular job other than the amiability of the job itself. But I do believe that almost every thinking, growing, maturing person can find the work he enjoys. And for the rest, the deep sources of satisfaction and interest can come from experiences not connected with their work. For some, their work is the very mainstay of their lives. For others, it's simply the means to an end. Many people are quite content to not work at all. Most retired people enjoy their retirement and wouldn't change things for the world. But for some, active, mind-engaging work is as necessary as food and drink. For many women, running a home, raising their children, caring for their husbands, and 1,001 things necessary to that life are more than enough for all the satisfaction they need. They're quite content with their lives, as they should be. For other women, such a life is unthinkable, the way to madness. They need other interests, other lives. To expect that 50% of the human race should be content with keeping house and raising a family is ridiculous. It's as ridiculous as it would be to expect all men to be lawyers or bricklayers. A woman can want the love and companionship of a man and perhaps a family, without at the same time having an aptitude or even an interest in keeping house. She might prefer to be a brain surgeon, a teacher, a business executive, or any one of the 200,000 possible occupations in our society. We've been taught to live within our means, and it's good advice for a company, a country, or a person. But what are our means? Have we explored our means? Do we know what our real means are? People say a person shouldn't reach beyond his capacity. It'll only end in frustration and disappointment. What is a person's capacity? How's he to find out what it is unless he reaches? The man and wife in a so-called average home on an average street in an average town haven't the faintest notion, as a rule, that they can sit down at the kitchen table, make a list of everything they want, number the items on the list in the order of their importance to them, and then get everything on that list in 5 years, certainly in 10. An American labor leader once commented that the American people can have anything they want. The trouble is that they don't know what they want, and this most certainly applies to income. A British survey team discovered that the average American family believes that happiness can be guaranteed with a 20% increase in income. It's obvious that most people haven't the foggiest notion as to what constitutes happiness. How does a person increase his income to the point where it more comfortably meets his needs, his present needs, and his savings and investment needs for the future? A good first step is to realize that everything we want, other people have, and will give us if we earn it. $1 from just 10% of the families in the United States would come to $7 million. Our income is in the hands of others. If our income is not what we want it to be, we must examine our product and our management. We have failed to qualify for it, or have lacked the courage and ideas to go after it. Thoreau said, "We have only to move confidently in the direction of our dreams to meet with a success unexpected in common hours." Interesting idea, isn't it? There's an exciting, renewing idea. We have only to move confidently in the direction of our dreams to meet with a success unexpected in common hours. The direction of our dreams is often nothing more than our genetic instructions, than our subconscious, our natural propensities, whatever we want to call it, trying to point us in the right direction. The minute we begin to move in the direction that's right for us, things start going our way. We begin to get lucky, as they say. So we need to ask ourselves, am I moving in the direction of my dreams? Or am I playing lockstep with millions of other people because of some stereotyped idea I picked up from people who don't know any more than I do, maybe less? People who perhaps have not proved in their own lives that they're experts when it comes to living successfully. Eric Hoffer put it pretty well when he said, we're taught not to waste time and raised to waste our lives. Something to think about. So a person, standing back and assessing the three main departments of his life, and understanding that his fortunes are the fruit of his character, gets a pretty good look at himself as manager of himself and whatever else he manages. I think, too, that it's a good idea to reassess our priorities from time to time. What is really important and what isn't? The mature person has this question pretty well straight in his mind. His goals, his needs are his own. They do not necessarily mirror those of the majority of other people. I think we'd be safe to say that with the mature person, his goals and what he considers to be important in his life will not be those held by the majority. The fact that he has goals sets him apart. Recent research into the modern plague of cardiovascular disease, with millions dying of heart disease years before they should, has turned up convincing evidence that we're bringing heart disease upon ourselves because of our lifestyle, our penchant for speed simply for speed's sake, by our impatience at delay, by our headlong rush toward what? Where? Where are we going? What's the hurry? The maturing person agrees with the great Swiss psychologist and psychiatrist Carl Jung, who said, the supreme goal of man is to fulfill himself as a creative, unique individual according to his own innate potentialities and within the limits of reality. And we can do that without a headlong, frenetic charge. You know, when we study golf under a good instructor, we're amazed to learn that an easy, slow, rhythmical swing gets the best results in direction and distance. As my good friend Julius Boros says, swing easy, but hit hard. It's the same in tennis, any sport. It's balance, it's rhythm. My good friend Herb True dropped in the office the other day and said, you know, we Catholics are on the birth control bandwagon too. It's just that we're in the rhythm section. It's good to remember, where our businesses are concerned, where our lives are concerned, it's quality and balance. It's living in balance that counts, that gets the best results, always. We'll live longer and in better health, do better, and enjoy it more. Unless we're doing piecework, it isn't the time we put in, it's the ideas we get and put to work. Everything we see about us that's man-made was once an idea in the mind of one person. Our ideas can be just as good. It takes maturity to realize that, as a rule, happiness and contentment do not come when we reach our goals. We're amazed to find that we were happier, more contented when we were striving toward them. I remember reading a comment by a New York University professor that went something to the effect that while dissatisfaction may be uncomfortable, the real disasters in life occur when we get what we want. He was referring to some of the larger goals of society, but the same thing often applies to us as persons. When we stop striving toward something new, something we find worthwhile and interesting, we begin to die. It's believed that's why teachers, scientists, writers, philosophers, farmers, and others who constantly have something new to look forward to tend to live such long, healthy lives. The teacher has a new class every year. The scientist is always working on a new, tough problem. The writer has a new book or article to do. The philosopher is forever uncovering new, interesting information, fresh ideas. And the farmer has the renewal of new crops and animals about him, a new season to work toward. Many others fit into the same category. Those who do not tend to live shorter lives. With no new place to go, they simply stop sooner. A generalization, of course, but it tends to work out. Incidentally, heart attacks, contrary to popular opinion, are not common among leaders in business and industry, in government and education. The leaders usually enjoy excellent health and have learned to live in balance. It's the people in the levels below the top who permit themselves to be skimmed off years before their time. It's been said that a heart attack is nature's way of telling us to slow down or change our habits, or both. It's a rude lesson, often fatal, but that's nature's way. How did Huxley put it? He compared living to playing a game of chess with an invisible opponent who's always strictly fair and just, but who never overlooks a mistake. If we play ill, he said, we are checkmated, without haste, but without remorse. And to those who play well, they're rewarded with the overflowing generosity with which the strong delight in strength. Living in balance, in anything, is the way to play the game well. How did James Allen put it? A calm, strong life is like a shade-giving tree in a thirsty land, a sheltering rock in a storm. You know, it's only when we're calm and at peace with ourselves that the good ideas tend to come. I think that's why we so often get our best ideas early in the morning or while doing something that's totally routine, such as shaving, showering, driving the car, or walking alone. Most people do not do much creative thinking, you know. In fact, they've been put down so many times as youngsters they've learned to distrust their own ideas, doubt their own ability to get worthwhile ideas. Our mind, and no one knows what the mind is, incidentally, or even where it is. The ancient Greeks thought for a while it was located in the liver. Our mind comes as standard equipment at birth. But since the demands put upon it are relatively small and it's not required to come up with new ideas, it soon falls into disuse. As with anything else, what we don't use, we tend to lose. And so it's easy to forget or never learn that we own free and clear the most amazing agency ever to appear on Earth, the human mind, all of it, whatever it is, subconscious and conscious, seeming to draw as it does on the mysterious stuff of the universe, past and present. You know, there's a system for creative thinking. Perhaps you're familiar with it. First, you define the problem. Put it on paper. Quite often, just defining it leads to a solution. The next step is to begin gathering data with regard to the idea. We need to find out all we can about the possible ways in which such an idea might be solved. We need to read about it, talk to people who've had similar problems, find out all we can about it. Next, we need to write down possible solutions. Think about possible solutions. Turn the problem every way but loose. Worry it like a puppy with a slipper. If it has to do with a product, can it be made larger, smaller, a different shape or color, simpler? You know, it's generally believed that in order to produce a product of excellent quality, it must cost more. The old dichotomy still hangs on the idea that if something is inexpensive, it must not be of the highest quality. Well, that's ridiculous. It can be inexpensive and still be of excellent quality. Think in terms of simplification. Can the superfluous be taken away? Sometimes a superior product must cost more because of the quality of its components and manufacture, but not necessarily. Since World War II, we've seen some excellent products turned out at very reasonable cost. After you've thought about it until you begin to dream about it and talk to yourself about it, then forget it. Let it slip down into the great cooker of your subconscious mind, where the archetypes of your racial memory and your genetic wizardry and 10 million ancestors can all work on it and hold it up against 1,000 solutions. The mind is like a supercomputer. It'll work on a problem while we're doing other things. Let it cook as long as it needs to, and then, one bright morning, if you're like I am, it'll usually wake you up at about 4 in the morning. The answer will pop into your mind as clear and simple and perfect as anything you ever saw in your life. You then yell Eureka, leap out of bed, and write the answer down on a piece of paper as fast as you can. If you don't, the idea can slip away as quietly and mysteriously as it came, and you can spend the next 20 years trying to recall it. The next step is to put the solution to work and stay with it to completion. Don't try to play it too safe. Nobody ever got to second base trying to keep one foot on first. Either you have confidence in your ideas or you don't. Getting good ideas is only about 10% of the job. The 90% is the follow-through. The person who will follow a good idea through to completion is one of the most valuable people in our society. Every problem is an opportunity. Our opportunities are an exact ratio to our problems. We have great national problems. Therefore, we have correspondingly great national opportunities. The bigger the problem, the better the opportunity. Problem, pollution. Great industries employing many hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of people will be built upon the problems of air, land, noise, and water pollution. Problem, population. Population means people, and whether you're serving their growing needs or helping them to hold their numbers in check, you've got opportunities. Millions are already being earned in these problem areas. There seem to be two main classifications of people in the world, the big group, which is made up of those who are part of the problem, and the small group made up of those who are part of the answer. Which group we choose to be in is up to us. A professor at MIT has said, the changes taking place in the world today are not merely changes from one form of society, one form of technology to another. They're so wide-sweeping that they're taking us from one major epoch of human history into another. We are in an order of change which is completely different from anything our ancestors knew, unless we go back 10,000 years when they invented property, ownership, work and mechanics based on the wheel. Change. Unprecedented, amazing change, and you and I are right in the middle of it. For some, change represents a threat to the status quo. For others, it represents unprecedented opportunity. For me, and I hope for you, change always represents new opportunities for growth, development, for the setting of new goals, for the moving on to new vistas, for the fresh breath of renewal. We don't know much about anything, really, but most of the top people in the disciplines touching on human conduct seem to be certain of two major points. One, the average healthy person functions at a fraction of his true capacity, and two, that the most exciting lifelong adventure is bringing more of our real powers to bear in our lives. Have you ever wondered why the great majority of the people on earth remain so ignorant? Why only a small fraction of the people really succeed at anything in life? Plato gave us the answer 400 years B.C. He said, "Neither do the ignorant seek after wisdom, for herein is the evil of ignorance, that he who is neither good nor wise is nevertheless satisfied with himself. He has no desire for that of which he feels no want." Isn't that about it? I think the great Spanish teacher and author José Ortega y Gasset carried Plato's wisdom right into the 20th century. He points out in his excellent book, Some Lessons in Metaphysics, that even though human knowledge has experienced an almost unbelievable growth during the past 100 years, most especially during the past 50, the great majority of the people have not only cut themselves off from this great growing body of knowledge, they have become, if anything, more barbaric than they were before, and he explains why. The only way a human being can get to knowledge is through study. Ortega y Gasset compares study to paying taxes. It's something people don't like to do, and something practically no one does when he doesn't have to. The great majority of people will go to school just as long as they have to. During that time, they will learn only what is absolutely necessary, which isn't very much, and they will stop on any subject the moment they're allowed to. That's why we have the mind-boggling phenomenon of a multi-billion-dollar school establishment and a nation of people with barely enough useful information to find the seat of their pants with both hands. You see, that answers a question that bothered me, and perhaps you too, for years. The question was, how is it possible in a nation as modern, in a society as advanced, in a standard of living as high as it is in ours, for a human being to reach the age of 50 with so small a collection of useful information? Never in the history of man has a nation offered the opportunities for learning as has the U.S., and had those opportunities as systematically ignored. Succeeding in the free world, and most especially the United States, is not difficult. All we need to do is obtain a fairly good education along the lines in which we're interested, and it's free. We're surrounded by it on every side. It lurks in readiness in our public libraries, in the extension courses of our fine schools and universities. And the great majority of the people sit dull-eyed and slack-jawed in front of their TV sets and occasionally querulously complain because they're not more successful, or tell a British research team they'd like a 20% increase in income. By far the great majority of them are overpaid as it is. But they have what we want. We have only to find ways to serve them better. They are the world's champion consumers. If they devoted a half hour a night to continuing education, they could be the world's smartest people, too, but they don't seem to know about that. Nor do they seem to know that there's freedom and fun in knowledge. As I mentioned earlier, if there's one thing that typifies our society, it's boredom, apathy. Whenever you find boredom, you find the absence of a good idea. And whenever you find the absence of a good and exciting idea, you find a person who isn't using his equipment anywhere near par. In the excellent book, The Nature of Man, there appears the line, "Man tends to achieve his being inasmuch as he develops love and reason." Now, there's something worth thinking about for the next 20 years. Man tends to achieve his being inasmuch as he develops love and reason. Love and reason. Here's where our hope lies, our opportunity for service, growth, and fulfillment. How are we doing in the love department? How good are we when it comes to reason? I think that great line should be made into a little sign that we should put up in our kitchens. It would be a good idea to have it on the visors of our cars as we drive to and from work. Love and reason. And on the job, too. Love and reason. It's hard to improve upon, isn't it? It's the way to transcend the grubby commonplaceness of existence. You know, the most important step a human being can take is the one that leads to transcendence, even a little transcendence. In the same book, The Nature of Man, we read, "Transcend is a tricky word. Let's give it its full meaning by trying to encompass its different specific meanings." Transcendence may be used in a religious or metaphysical context as indicating the existence of a higher power. Transcendence may also mean a liberation from egotism and selfishness, and thus an attitude of openness and real communication with others. Transcendence may finally mean, and this especially in existentialist thinking, a going beyond oneself in time, a reaching out of oneself toward the future. However, one thing is common to the different meanings of the word: going beyond our self-absorbed ego, freeing ourselves from the prison of egotism and relating ourselves to reality. Once the term has been defined, it seems clear that life has a meaning if transcendence is achieved. If man does not limit himself to the selfishness and destructiveness of the mirror created by Narcissus, to give oneself is the only way of being oneself. This paradoxical sentence is only paradoxical in appearance. It can be found in the teachings of the Upanishads, in the Gospels, in the Vedas, and among others, in the writings of Plato, Aristotle, Kant, Goethe, Marx, Shaler, Russell, and Machado. Transcendence is a goal worth working toward, and within the reach of anyone. By getting above the dismal, narrow life based strictly on the ego, and learning to give of ourselves to our work, our families, and our play, and by so doing become ourselves, we solve our three major problems at one fell swoop. How we spend our days, our family, our income. Our days will be full and richly rewarding. Our family life will take on new love and meaning, and our income will take care of itself. By really giving of ourselves, we will be maximizing our service, which will automatically maximize our rewards. It's not an easy thing to achieve, but worth working toward, and it can be done in balance, without rush, by getting our priorities straight and organizing our time. An early start helps. Living in balance helps our appearance, too. We tend to look younger when peace and confidence radiate from us. It's been said that everybody's face is his own fault after 40. It reflects the real person inside. I spoke of learning to play golf earlier. My good friend, the well-known golfing writer Gary Wyron, tells of a man in San Francisco who jogs 6.7 miles every morning. That's the distance around Golden Gate Park. He also walks 5 miles to and from work. He works as a banquet waiter, boxes a couple of times a week, and tosses in 8 or 9 games of handball. As you can imagine, he's in magnificent physical condition. He's also 103 years old. His name is Larry Lewis, and he began running in 1876 at the age of 9, and he's been running and keeping as active as he was at that early age ever since. He's made the comment that you should never refer to a person as being so many years old, since old often means something dilapidated. Larry Lewis doesn't intend to become dilapidated, especially during his second 100 years. Gary Wyron suggests that each of us should ask himself these questions. Are my muscles getting soft and flabby? Do I feel chronically tired and dragged out? Am I clumsy performing physical tasks which once were relatively easy for me? Can I feel and see unsightly bulges of fat on my body? Do I have to stop and catch my breath after climbing 1 or 2 flights of stairs? Is my physical zest for life missing or rapidly failing? If you agreed to more than a couple of those questions, you may well become a victim of premature aging. Here's another great contributor to the cardiovascular plague I mentioned earlier. It isn't that we want to live forever, or even as old as Larry Lewis may be, although I think it's a great idea if you're enjoying life, but we can ward off premature disease and avoid looking like 200 pounds of chicken fat in a polyethylene bag by spending just a few minutes a day exercising. I do. I hate it, but I do, and I find it gets me off to a pretty good start. Much better than when I don't exercise. I've never been a physical fitness nut, but I believe we should take care of our bodies just as we should our minds, and to get the best use of both takes exercise. Gary Wyron says that in the absence of crippling disease or chronic disability, there is no biological or physiological reason why a human being need deteriorate markedly until well past the age of 70. Most people don't lose the battle against premature aging. They simply never wage it. Sir Adolph Abrams once made the comment that everybody wants to live a long time, but nobody wants to be old. Well, to a surprising extent, it's possible. Gary Wyron goes on to say, with daily exercise, you'll not only look better, with stronger and firm muscles, and have a more attractive figure and posture, you'll also sleep more soundly, experience less listlessness and fatigue, be able to release pent-up emotions, increase your endurance and capacity for work, enjoy better health, greater longevity, and possess an improved self-concept. It's estimated that only 4 to 5% of the adult American population exercises regularly. Why? Why such an anemic figure in the face of such consequences? The answer lies in the placement of priorities. Our scale of values is cockeyed. Think for a moment. What would you trade for good health? Can you think of anything you would trade for good health? I can't, because with health we can do anything and enjoy it. Every morning I face the chore of exercising. I do it in my dressing room adjoining the bath. I hate it, as I said. It only takes a few minutes. I feel great when I get into the shower after exercising, and I'm glad I do it after I've done it, but I hate to start it. Once I start, I'm okay. It's like getting started at this typewriter of mine. I look for any little excuse to delay it, put it off for a few minutes, but once I start, I'm okay. No one can make you exercise every morning but yourself. It's an excellent exercise in self-control, too. It's truly amazing at how quickly the body responds. Before you know it almost, you'll look years better. You'll have a flat, hard belly and good muscles. Your wind will be good and your step brisk, and, well, it could add many years to your life. I read an estimate not long ago that 80% of all deaths are brought on by obesity, overweight. Now, exercise won't take off weight, although it will redistribute it to some extent. Only eating sensibly will have you at your proper weight and keep you at your proper weight. You can eat the same well-balanced meals, just eat less. Take off 2 pounds a week until you're at your proper weight, then get on the scales every morning without fail. If you've gained a pound or two, take it easy on the groceries. One of the hardest things for most of the population to learn is that food intake must match energy output. When we were in our teens and early 20s, we usually had high energy output and had to eat a lot. In fact, we formed the habit of eating a lot. Now, habits tend to remain constant or actually increase with time. So chances are a given person will continue to eat the same amount of food, or even more as he grows older, and as his energy curve begins to go down. The spread between his descending energy curve and his food intake line will be represented by the spread of his waistline and the seat of his pants. The normal human stomach is about the size of your clenched fist. Before you begin to eat, look at your clenched fist and then eat that much food. End of good health department. You know, we're learning that we took a lot of things for granted which simply are not true, not as we thought them to be. We thought we were educating our children by sending them to our schools, and we've discovered that we have a nation of uneducated people. We thought mankind was moving upward and onward, and found ourselves living in the bloodiest century in the history of human civilization. We thought our technology and progress would give us better health, especially with 2 chickens in every pot, and find ourselves in 20th place in the world health picture. We thought our new higher standard of living, our new wealth, would give us a world free of crime, and we have a national crime picture that makes you want to run for cover. Lots of opportunities lurking in there for a thinking person. And here's a creative thinking problem for you to work on if you like. If you were to lose your present source of income tomorrow, how would you live for the next 12 months? Quite often, military commanders in the field are reprimanded or demoted for falling victim to a surprise attack. It's happened many times. Well, each of us is the commander of his own life and family's defenses, and it's the duty of an intelligent commander to be prepared for any eventuality he can imagine. Now, every member of our family should know what to do, where to go instantly in case of fire. With the crime rate what it is, we should make certain our homes are as secure from unlawful entry as we can make them. It should be high on our priorities list. And we should have a good plan to put into action should our income stop for one reason or another. A woman dying on the roadside as a result of an auto accident was asked why she had failed to fasten her seatbelt. Her last words were that it wrinkled her clothes. Here's a typical, though tragic, mix-up in priorities. We can get our clothes pressed. The sudden loss of income game is an interesting one for the whole family. Most women tend to be ill-prepared to fend for themselves, not just married women, but young girls just out of school. Most families don't seem to realize that the average woman who marries in our society will work at a job for 25 years. If she doesn't marry, she'll work for 40 years or more, just like a man. And knowing that she must, in all likelihood, work at least 25 years, even if she marries, you'd think most girls would prepare themselves for interesting and well-paying work. Not so. Most young women come into the job market with skills limited to driving a car and talking on the telephone. They're not too good at those. This is true even of most women who go to college. They come to the world of work with no marketable skills, and thus put themselves at the bottom of the economic heap. They also miss the fun of a meaningful career, and they have no ace in the hole in case their marriages don't work out, or the husband dies, or in case they'd like to get back into the swim of things after their kids have grown up and moved out, during the so-called and often aptly called empty years. A woman can be married for 20 years, lose her husband because of death or separation, and still have nothing whatever to bring to the labor market. In 20 years, she could have become expert at anything, playing the piano, interior decorating, selling, retailing, teaching, nursing, secretarial work. Think of the whiz she could have become at typing and shorthand in 20 years. Yet, as a rule, she does nothing. She comes to the world of work with a dazed expression on her poor, scared face and with wringing hands. Why? Suppose you tell me. She'll most likely say, "I didn't think it would happen to me." Why not? It happens to millions of women every year. How about a little preparation? A few minutes a day add up quickly. Do you know that you can turn out the equivalent of a novel every 3 months by just typing 4 pages a day? The cumulative effect of a little time well spent every day is almost unbelievable. There are hundreds of excellent courses that can be taken. I think it all comes down to the fact that most human beings form the habit early in life of doing no more than they absolutely have to do. They miss the fun of learning, the fun of achieving, beyond the simple chores of their days. When the kids are young, preschool, they occupy all of a woman's time. But once in school, she can usually find time, just as a man can, for some independent line of study. Now, why should we do all this? Why go to all this trouble? Why not just sit down and turn into a kumquat? Well, it gets back to what Gerald Sykes and other experts have pointed out. The worst guilt of all is the guilt of not having become our true selves. The pervasive discontent we see on all sides is triggered more often than not by the inner knowledge that life ought to be better, more fun, more exciting, more interesting. And it should, and it can be, when we bring more of ourselves to bear upon it, when we find more of our real talents, when we reach into the deep reservoirs of ability, even genius, that lurk in each of us. Emerson wrote, "Intellect annuls fate." It means that to the degree that we use the brains we were born with, do we move toward freedom. To the extent that we do not think and learn, are we dependent upon fate, circumstances, chance. A person's freedom depends upon the extent of his thinking. The extent of his thinking might be said to depend in large measure upon how successful he's been in cutting himself loose from the superstitions and alibis and misinformation many of us grew up with. I've long believed that the nagging discontent observable in the lives of so many rests on the fact that they seem to think that there's an easy, effortless way to succeed in life. They forget the rule about opposites. And seeking what appears to be the easy way out, they actually make life more difficult for themselves. By following instead what in the beginning appeared perhaps the more difficult route, the route to knowledge and self-discovery, and by taking what might appear to the casual onlooker to be a considerable risk, it turns out that in a dozen years that pass quickly anyway, they've taken the better, and in the end the easier, safer, more satisfying way. Sooner or later we must realize the truth of Gerald Sykes' marvelous statement that any solid achievement must of necessity take years of humble apprenticeship and lead to estrangement from most of society. Let me repeat that statement. Any solid achievement must of necessity take years of humble apprenticeship and lead to estrangement from most of society. I think we all know how true the first part of that statement is. Always be suspicious of the so-called quick success. Even towering geniuses usually don't reach their best work until after many years of seasoning and dedicated experience. If it comes easy, it usually doesn't amount to much. But what about that part about leading to estrangement from most of society? To become great at anything is to be a nonconformist and cut oneself away from the great majority, even of those in one's own field. The great businessmen, the great professional people, the great educators are all mavericks. The late Dr. Abraham Maslow, former president of the American Psychological Association and the founder of the third force in psychology, kicked over the traces. They thought Marshall Field was crazy, and every really great leader in every field has had to go it alone for a time at least. The person who waits for innovations and ideas to come from others in his field, which is what 98% of the people in every field do, can never be better than second best. He's got to be a follower. A conformist. It's true in banking, in industry, in medicine, education, in every field. You can't go along with the crowd and amount to very much. The two simply don't go together. My old friend Dr. L.D. Pankey of Coral Gables, Florida, comes to mind, the father of occlusal rehabilitation and dentistry, who now travels all over the world teaching his marvelous methods to others. We often see murals in public buildings which depict great masses striving upward toward the sun. It may look good, but it's pure fiction. They not only don't strive upwards, they generally resist whatever good ideas do come along, and throughout history have tried their best to torture, maim, and kill those who have tried to lead them out of their grinding ignorance. We can love people, humanity, in the sense of agape, unselfishly, and with a real desire to serve. We can and should love mankind as our brothers and sisters if we can pull it off. But the best-known way on earth to never amount to a tinker's dam is to lose oneself in the crowd. As Will Rogers said, whenever you find yourself on the side of the majority, it's time to reform. So it's true. Any solid achievement must of necessity take years of humble apprenticeship and lead to estrangement from most of society. Peter Drucker, his excellent book, The Age of Discontinuity, points out that historically the men of knowledge have not held power, at least not in the West. They were ornaments. If they had any role at all at the seats of the mighty, it was that of court jester. There was so little truth historically in the old adage that the pen is mightier than the sword that it can only be called the opium of the intellectuals. Knowledge was nice. Knowledge was a solace to the afflicted and a joy to the wealthy who could afford it, but it was not power. Indeed, up to recently, the only position for which knowledge prepared was that of servant of the mighty. Oxford and Cambridge, until the middle of the 19th century, trained clergymen. The European universities, civil servants. The business schools in the United States, set up less than a century ago, have been preparing well-trained clerks rather than entrepreneurs. But now, says Drucker, knowledge has power. It controls access to opportunity and advancement. Scientists and scholars are no longer merely on tap, they're on top. They must be listened to by the policymakers. They largely determine what policies can be considered seriously in such crucial areas as defense or economics. They're largely in charge of the formation of the young, and the learned are no longer poor. On the contrary, they're true capitalists in a knowledge society. Salaries have gone up fast in the schools. The man of knowledge also increasingly has earnings opportunities outside of academia through research grants or as a consultant. Drucker goes on to talk about the responsibilities that go with power and mentions that our faculties are chock full of able-bodied people who stopped working the moment they made associate or full professor and got tenure. People in the education industry are much like people everywhere. There's a tendency to do no more than one must, and then wallow in the resulting discontent and alienation. That's my comment, not Drucker's. But the point I'm trying to make here is that the age of the dummy with muscles is past. We've learned that there needn't be a dichotomy there either. Some of our greatest athletes are top students, and the day of poking fun at the bookworm or the good student went out with the ice truck and a rumble seat. Surveys have even discovered that girls prefer men who wear glasses. They say glasses make a man look more intelligent. They're interested in brains, not biceps, although the two, as I mentioned, quite often go together. So an hour a day, improving your mind, is the best exercise habit you can form, and one that pays big dividends in all three of those important departments of life. In one of his plays, Pulitzer Prize-winning playwright Archibald MacLeish has one of his characters say, "The only thing about a man that is a man is his thinker. Everything else you can find in a pig or a horse." Yes, intellect annuls fate, and fear is ignorance. And speaking of good quotations, here's a good one from the pen of the American writer Christopher Morley. There's only one success, to be able to spend your life in your own way. Here's the dilemma that faces most kids in school. How do I want to spend my life? What should I choose to do? What can I do that will fill my life with interest and bring me the particular rewards I'm looking for in life? Christopher Morley's definition might well be carved over the school entrance. There's only one success, to be able to spend your life in your own way. A leading business executive resigned from one of the world's biggest companies to take over the business school of an American university, and he commented that a man ought to uproot himself every 10 to 12 years or so. Morley's definition might mean doing that. It's no longer necessary to stick with one job for life. The Blue Cross people reported recently that ours is the first generation of human beings to experience a middle age of 30 years instead of the old 15. It's true. It used to be 2 chickens in every pot, then it became 2 cars, more recently 2 homes, and now 2 families. More and more people are starting a new child or 2 in their 40s when the first group moves out into college in the world. I was talking with a friend of mine the other day, and he told me that only about 3% of all American Armed Force veterans have taken advantage of their GI Bill educational allowances. I remember reading that the employees of Macy's department store in New York had grumbled because the company had been hiring executives and managers from outside the company. So Macy's management put in a free management training program for employees so that it could promote from within the organization. Only about 3% took advantage of the training, even though it was free. All they had to do was stay after work. That 3% figure keeps popping up in cases like that. It seems that only about 3% of the people are seriously interested in investing a part of their time and energy in programs calculated to help them get ahead in the world. The rest yell and flail around for pay raises and more fringe benefits, but when it's suggested that they might do something to improve themselves, make themselves more valuable, upgrade themselves with the times for their own good, No, the old slogan is still, take it easy, but take it. Many years ago there was a cartoon which appeared in the Saturday Evening Post which depicted two men in their mid-30s sitting at a bar with drinks in front of them. One of them is saying, "I want to burn with a hard, gem-like flame. I want to scale the heights, storm the citadel, reach the top." And then there's a pause and he says, "Now to heck with it." I mentioned Dr. Maslow earlier. Based on his research, growth towards self-actualization is both natural and necessary. By growth he means constant development of talents, capacities, creativity, wisdom, and character. Phrased another way, growth is the progressive satisfaction of higher and higher levels of psychological needs. In Maslow's words, man demonstrates in his own nature a pressure toward fuller and fuller being, more and more perfect actualization of his humanness, in exactly the same naturalistic scientific sense that an acorn may be said to be pressing toward being an oak tree. It's easy to see in children, but is so often apparently lacking in adults. Psychological growth leads toward psychological health. A person can grow out of his psychological problems and hang-ups just as he can outgrow his clothes. We tend to distrust our natural instincts. We've often been taught that our instincts are bad somehow. Moreover, the growth process requires constant willingness to take chances, to make mistakes, to break habits. One can choose, says Maslow, to go back toward safety or forward toward growth. Growth must be chosen again and again. Fear must be overcome again and again. Maslow also advanced what he called the Jonah complex, the tendency in adults to doubt and even fear their own abilities, their own potential to be greater. As he put it, we fear our highest possibilities as well as our lowest ones. We're generally afraid to become that which we can glimpse in our most perfect moments, under the most perfect conditions, under conditions of great courage. We enjoy and even thrill to the godlike possibilities we see in ourselves in such peak moments, and yet we simultaneously shiver with weakness, awe, and fear for these very same possibilities. The pleasures of growth and development require effort, self-discipline, and a certain amount of pain, but they're worth 1,000 times what they cost. Are you familiar with Murphy's laws? Edsel Murphy is an electronics engineer who's made some significant contributions to the understanding of the behavior of inanimate objects. One is that any error that can creep into a calculation will do so, and that error will be in the direction that will do the most damage to the calculation. Another is that all constants are variables. In any given computation, the figure that is most obviously correct will be the source of error. In the area of production, Murphy's laws go like this. Any wire cut to length will be too short. Identical units tested under identical conditions will not be identical in the field. A dropped tool will land where it can do the most damage. That's also known as the law of selective gravitation. A device selected at random from a group having 99% reliability will be a member of the 1% group. If a circuit cannot fail, it will. A fail-safe circuit will destroy others. Components that must not and cannot be assembled improperly will be. The most delicate component will drop. A transistor protected by a fast-acting fuse will protect the fuse by blowing first. After the last of 16 mounting screws have been removed from an access cover, it will be discovered that the wrong access cover has been removed. After an access cover has been secured by 16 hold-down screws, it will be discovered that the gasket has been omitted. After an instrument has been fully assembled, extra components will be found on the bench. Hermetic seals will leak. The probability of a dimension being omitted from a drawing or plan is directly proportional to its importance. Dimensions will always be expressed in the least usable term. Velocity, for example, will be expressed in furlongs per fortnight. Murphy's laws. I found that they also apply to keys. If you have the right key on a ring of 4 keys, the odds are not 25% that you'll use the right key first. They're more like 1/100th of 1%. And when you want a particular tool for a particular job at home, that particular tool and only that tool will be missing. It will make its reappearance the moment the need for it is past. People who underestimate their ability to think and solve problems should familiarize themselves with recent neurological research. Work at the UCLA Brain Research Institute points to enormous abilities latent in everyone. In fact, the Institute points to an incredible hypothesis. It seems the ultimate creative capacity of the human brain may be, for all practical purposes, infinite. Russian scientists have been amazed by the enormous reserve capacity of the mind. Writing in the journal Soviet Life Today, the eminent Soviet scholar and writer Ivan Yefremov said, Man under average conditions of work and life uses only a small part of his thinking equipment. If we were able to force our brain to work at only half its capacity, we could, without any difficulty whatever, learn 40 languages, memorize an encyclopedia from cover to cover, and complete the required courses of dozens of colleges. A statement like that makes us realize how we formed the habit of living in low gear, getting by, as Huxley once put it, without too much discredit. It's been found by researchers such as Dr. Maslow that people who live close to their true capacity have a pronounced sense of well-being and considerable energy, and see themselves as leading purposeful and creative lives. Isn't that what we all want to do? Thank you. Imagination is everything. I can't remember who wrote those 3 words in that order, but it seems he summed up it all. Imagination is everything. Our lives will reflect the way we use our imagination. The child imagines himself walking like the adults he sees above him. As soon as he can walk, he wants to run. As we reach successive plateaus in life, we begin to imagine ourselves reaching the next one. And thus our imaginations lead us on from one idea to another through every day and every year of our lives. But if we're not careful, our imaginations can lead us into mazes of confused complications from which we may find it difficult to extricate ourselves. So it's a good idea, as we use our imagination, to always strive for simplicity, to avoid the complicated. Remember the 3 main departments of living: family, how we spend our days, work and leisure, and income. If we're wise, we'll work toward keeping each as uncomplicated as possible, as interesting and as rewarding as possible, but at the same time simple and straightforward. Are we living the lives we want to live, or are we living stereotyped lives based on phony values? Usually they're a combination of both, a kind of compromise which says surely other people must have some idea of what constitutes the good life. After all, there are so many of them. But when we look closer, we see that they're living shadow lives, as Mumford calls them. In competition, ice skating, you've seen a couple match each other's movements almost perfectly. It's called shadow skating, I believe. They try to match each other's movements so perfectly that each might be the other's shadow. In any sort of neighborhood, you will tend to find people living much the same way. Their homes, landscaping, furnishings, and lives are typified, if by anything at all, by an almost total lack of imagination. Imagination, like anything else, needs fuel for production. You can't have something from nothing. Thomas Edison said, "I'm a sponge. I want to know the answer to everything." With his great lifetime inventory of information, he could assemble an incredible array of new combinations and permutations. Electric light is a combination of elements, and so is any good idea, or any bad idea for that matter. Most of us make the mistake of not asking why. Why do I live here, in this house, rather than in some other house? Why this life instead of another life? Why this work instead of other work? Why these rewards instead of others? Now, this doesn't mean we'll change anything necessarily, but at least we'll be living lives that have been examined and found to be to our personal liking. We'll know that we're not living the lives we're living simply because they reflect and are pretty much composite copies of the lives we see about us. There should be, to my way of thinking, deep main currents in our lives. Our family lives, our work and our leisure, and our rewards in the form of income. Our family lives should be good and richly satisfying. What is our input here? How are we using our imaginations to bring meaning, charm, and love to our family relationships? It's an ongoing process that should become richer and more meaningful with the passing of time. As we grow older, we should come to love each other more, instead of it being the other way around. Imagination can bring this about, making allowances for unmanageable neuroses or even psychoses that may crop up. I've often thought of producing appointment calendars with weekly reminders that we should think of something interesting to do for those we love, to let them know we don't take them for granted. A dinner out, a weekend trip, flowers, a card, a phone call, a gift, maybe nothing more than a big hug and the words, "I love you very much." The 5 most important words in the language when arranged in that order. Or planning a really interesting vacation 6 or 8 months in advance, instead of waiting until the last minute and finding yourself with nothing very interesting to do. How about your home? Is it what you want? H.L. Mencken once commented that the average home is a house of horrors and doesn't reflect poor taste so much as it reflects no taste at all. People tend to order their steaks medium, and their homes and lives the same way. Medium rhymes with tedium. The family is the most important part of the life of most of us. What good is accomplishment if there's no one with whom to share it? What good is anything if there's no one with whom to share it? And since the family is first in importance, it represents a fertile field for the imagination, not just for the woman in the family, but for the man, and hopefully the kids as well. Family creative thinking sessions are a lot of fun, and a never-ending source of good ideas. Check every idea for basic simplicity. Avoid complication whenever possible. Next, imagination as it applies to the way we spend our days, our work, and our leisure. Let's take them in order. No matter what it is we want, if it's within the realm of reality, we can get it through imagination applied to our work. Nothing now being done by man is being done the way it can and will be. Everything will be done much better. Not can be, will be, whether it's the result of our applied imagination or not. People who resist change in their work are impediments to progress, yet the first words the new person on the job usually hears are, "Now this is the way it's done around here." A business leader made the comment that if we're doing anything this year the way it was done last year, we're obsolete. Now that's an extreme generalization, but deserves careful attention. In most things it's true. Now while getting new ideas in business is usually the best way to guarantee unpopularity, it's still the only way to renewal and growth. People resist new ideas from the top to the bottom of an organization, especially if it's an older organization. Championing a new idea is a lonely business. But if you believe it's a good idea, if your research causes you to believe it will be of significant benefit, and the costs and disruption necessary to test the idea are not completely out of line with its ultimate benefits, then fight it through. Do it as diplomatically as you can, make as few enemies as possible, but fight it through if you believe in it. The object of management is not to be loved by the people in the organization. It's to make things happen most profitably for all concerned, particularly the customer. People historically have stood in the way of virtually every good idea, and especially if it isn't theirs. Your good ideas can lead to your dismissal from an organization. But ideas are more important than a job. With good ideas, you have independence. There's always a way to succeed. A friend of mine found he couldn't get his ideas through the board of directors. He resigned, and beginning at about the age of 60, he built a $300 million a year business on his rejected ideas. Walt Disney used to ask 10 people what they thought of a new idea. If they were unanimous in their rejection of it, he would begin working on it immediately. Our world today consists of thousands of things people once thought were impossible. How many good ideas have you followed through to completion in your work during the past year? A business whose very beginning and success were based on innovative imagination will become a model of stodgy convention with a few years of good profits. You know, Arnold Palmer's success as a truly great golfer was based on his ability to never try to play it too safely, too cozy. He was never foolhardy, but he would try the more testing shot when others would have played it safe. He lost some tournaments as a result, but he won a great many and achieved world fame and respect, too. There's much to be said for the conservation of assets, but it should be remembered that they tend to slow you down and put more emphasis on saving what you've got than on building for the future. Of course, there's a happy balance between conservation and innovation that should never be lost sight of. Ask yourself, what business am I in? What is its purpose? How does it contribute to the well-being of mankind? And how can I make it better? Not how can we produce more necessarily. We have almost overproduced ourselves into a world junk pile. In trying to produce more and more, many businesses have lost sight of real quality. Quantity became the god, with a small increment of profit on mountain ranges of units, gadgets, shiny junk that fell apart when the purchaser got it home, knobs that broke or fell off, buttons that came off, toys that couldn't stand the strain of being unwrapped. Towering mountain ranges of shiny, worthless junk, none of it worth our time, let alone our money. There's a rapidly growing avant-garde that will one day represent the majority of the population that is determined to buy quality, and they'll go to any country to get it. We can satisfy this growing, discriminating market now and in the years ahead. Many of our fastest-growing companies are proving it, but it means going back to the old verity. Quality first, quantity second. Both can be achieved through human imagination, the most incredible agency ever to appear on Earth. It all comes back to what we want, and, more importantly, what we want to be as persons. A good profit and a steady growth is all that we need in business. We don't have to shoot off the top of the page. But the chances of truly spectacular growth are better via quality through imagination than through quantity for quantity's sake.
It makes no difference whether it's a yo-yo or an automobile. Over the long haul, quality will win out. If the size must be reduced to maintain price and improve quality, we should make it smaller. There's always a way through imagination. You know, each of us has a gold mine between his ears. If he fails to mine the gold, well, that's his business. But it's there, all that we could want, and much more. Now, as to input, we should never stop building our store of information. We can never get an idea without raw material, which is information and application. If there's real talent there, too, so much the better. But talent has a way of developing with hard application, daily application, perspiration, long hours of study and deep thought. Become a sponge for information that applies to what you do. Read everything you can find on the subject. Build a fine library of books that are filled with the ideas of others on your specialty, whatever it may be. You know, my wife is a great cook. She must have 30 cookbooks. People who say they're great cooks without ever reading the ideas of others are kidding themselves. I know a writer who refuses to read the works of other writers. He's never amounted to much. Great painters have always learned more from other painters than they did from nature, and they still do. Somerset Maugham laboriously copied the style of writers he admired. I mean, he would sit and copy page after page of the actual words they wrote, so that he could learn how they wrote. He then wrote the stories he wanted to write, with a marvelously finished skill. If we're in management, we can learn from the masters in management. Rohr, Hibbler, and Replogel's book on management, and the new Dow Jones-Irwin book, The Enjoyment of Management, by John Price, are a couple of good ones to study. You know, when I first started in radio, I listened carefully to the country's best and highest-paid radio personalities. They had learned their skills through many years of hard work. I learned a great deal from them. All I had to do was turn on my radio and listen. Frank Sinatra learned his amazing breath control from Tommy Dorsey, and every great performer who ever lived has had a model or models he or she studied and admired and wanted to emulate. How about you? The person who thinks he doesn't have to study his craft, art, or profession is a pompous fool, and his chances of ever amounting to much are very slim indeed. A never-ending taking in of the best thoughts of the best people in the field of our choice is the best assurance that we will never stagnate, never stop producing. Paracelsus wrote, "Thoughts are free and are subject to no rule. On them rests the freedom of man, and they tower above the light of nature. For thoughts give birth to a creative force that is neither elemental or sidereal. Thoughts create a new heaven, a new firmament, a new source of energy from which new arts flow. When man undertakes to create something, he establishes a new heaven, as it were, and from it the work that he desires to create flows into him. For such is the immensity of man that he is greater than heaven and earth." He went on to write, "The child is still an uncertain being, and he receives his form according to the potentialities that you awaken in him. If you awaken his ability to make shoes, he'll be a shoemaker. If you awaken the stone cutter in him, he'll be a stone cutter. And if you summon forth the scholar in him, he will be a scholar. And this can be so because all the potentialities are inherent in him. What you awaken in him comes forth from him. The rest remains unawakened, absorbed in sleep. We are born to be awake, not to be asleep." And then he wrote, "Therefore, man, learn and learn, question and question, and do not be ashamed of it. For only thus can you earn a name that will resound in all countries and never be forgotten." Hope is one of the loftiest emotions we can experience, for whenever we lack hope, our fruits will also be lacking. He who knows nothing loves nothing. He who can do nothing understands nothing. He who understands nothing is worthless. But he who understands also loves, notices, sees. The more knowledge is inherent in a thing, the greater the love. Everything lies in knowledge. From it comes every fruit. Knowledge bestows faith, for he who knows God believes in him. He who does not know him does not believe in him. Everyone believes in what he knows. Everyone believes in what he knows. And there's your answer to the question, why is there so little belief in anything today? It's because we believe in what we know, and most people don't try to really know anything. Do you know where I got those great quotations of Paracelsus? From the book The Nature of Man, which I recommended in Direct Line 1. People who say they don't have time for reading, research, and study had better find time or throw in the towel. There's no other way to make it over the long haul. You can't make wine without grapes. There must be input if there's to be output. A time spent each day in study will produce a never-ending stream of interesting, imaginative ideas we can apply to our work. It will also confer upon us a very precious thing, freedom, complete independence. We can live where we please, earn the income we desire, and have a wonderful life through the systematic development of our imaginations. Imagination is everything. What applies to our work also applies to our leisure, our hobbies, avocations. If we play golf or tennis, it's much more enjoyable if we play well. Again, a systematic, never-ending study of the game or sport will keep our ability and enthusiasm growing over the years. We don't have to become obsessed with it or be a professional, but it's great to develop confidence and a real facility for the fun we enjoy, boating, fishing, skiing, flying, tennis, golf, bridge, whatever it is. It's more fun if we're fairly good at it. Working at our hobbies gives us the rest we need from the problems at work and at home. It helps us live in balance with a minimum of friction. You know, scientists are in agreement that the old biblical admonition is correct when it says, "He that is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he that keepeth his spirit is greater than he that taketh a city." If we can catch the vision that life is lived from within out, that it's not so much what happens around us or to us as what happens in us that counts, we can set our own pace, live our own lives, meet situations and people objectively without fear or resistances, and we can become healthier and as prosperous and happy as we want to be. Anyone who knows anything about mechanics knows that friction is the enemy. Steel wheels on rails reduce friction almost to the vanishing point, and an enormous, almost unbelievable load can be moved great distances with surprisingly little power. I had dinner in a restaurant in San Antonio the other night at the top of that great tower that was built for the Hemisphere, and the owner of the restaurant told me that that entire thing turns with a 1.5 horsepower motor. Steel, frictionless balls working on steel rails. We can do the same by reducing friction from our lives. The more friction, the slower we must move with greater effort. Some men in medical research go so far as to say that man has within him a health-maintaining force sufficient to keep him alive and healthy almost indefinitely, if it were not for the destructive effect of uncontrolled emotions. As James Allen wrote, "The calm man, having learned how to govern himself, knows how to adapt himself to others, and they in turn reverence his strength and feel they can learn from him and rely upon him." In all the departments of living, developing calmness, serenity, is worth any effort. It typifies the great person, the true professional. It takes daily practice, especially if we're not a naturally calm or phlegmatic kind of person. The calm person moves ahead. People just naturally look to him for leadership, especially when things aren't going as they should. But not enough has been said about the contributions calmness makes to good health. Good health in man, as it is in all living things, is the natural state. The body has fail-safe mechanisms that automatically go to work whenever good health is threatened. Ill health comes more often from emotional stress than anyone even dares to guess. Friction is the culprit. Developing serenity, a calm, peaceful attitude toward others, our work, and our goals will work wonders in the response we'll get. So we should calm down, slow down, and with a little discrimination as to what we allow to get through to us, we can do much more and enjoy ourselves much more with much less friction and effort. When we wake in the morning, there are 1,000 distractions poised to get at us as we go through the day. They clamor at us in sound and sight. They're frantic, frenetic. They implore, they importune, they threaten, they cajole. If we'd let them, they'd keep us spinning like confused tops. We need to put a sentry at the door to our consciousness and look at the credentials of that which would enter. We can suffer from inner pollution, too. We should be choosy what we let enter our consciousness, as choosy as we are about the furnishings in our homes. A great educator once said something to the effect that the most interesting people are the people with the most interesting pictures in their minds. If you will think of the things that clamor for your attention as paintings waiting to hang on your walls, you can become very selective. A salesman was talking to a farmer who was very much interested in what he was selling. They were standing in the shade of a tree near the house when the sound of the telephone's ringing reached them. The farmer made no attempt to leave. Finally, the salesman mentioned that the phone was ringing, and the farmer commented that he'd had that thing installed for his convenience, not for anyone else's. and went on with the conversation. There is a way to restore charm and interest to our lives, and it seems to be to cut down on the number of things we let engage our attention and make certain that what does get through is good. I had the good fortune to be raised near a harbor. As a kid, I used to spend hours down the docks watching the ships loading and unloading. They'd bring in cargoes from the distant and romantic ports all over the world, and I used to stand there with a faraway look in my eyes, envying those sailors who were so fortunate. They traveled over the distant horizon to places I could only imagine or read about in my geography books. I hung around so much that some of the mates and skippers finally recognized me and actually invited me on board. I guess you can imagine the heaven that was for me. They'd take me from the engine room to the forecastle and find it the place I liked best, the navigation bridge. The bridge had the best view, but more than that, it was there that the ship was controlled and steered into all those distant places I dreamed of. Once I was even invited to lunch. I didn't get over that for months. It's strange how something like that can have such an overwhelming fascination for a youngster and exert such an influence over his life. As soon as I was old enough, I was on a ship, and I sailed to quite a few of those distant deep-water ports. No matter how long the trip, I never got tired of sailing and watching the sea in all its different moods. Entering a distant port, even if I'd been there before, was always a brand-new thrill. Over the years, I've tried to figure out why I like ships so much, and I believe I've come up with the answer. Ships operate during their entire lives the way we should, but so few do. Maybe you've never thought much about it, but at any given moment, a ship is 100% successful. That is, it's either sailing to a predetermined port of call, or it's in port getting ready to sail to another one. A ship owner is smart. He knows a ship can only reach one port of call at a time. You never see any doubt or confusion, or trying to do more than one thing at a time. You can climb up to the navigation bridge of a big, far-sailing ship and ask the captain where he's going, and he'll tell you instantly and in one sentence. How many people do you know who can do the same thing? It seems that most people want so many different things, most of which they're not really sure of, that they're like the guy who jumped on their horse and rode off in all directions at once. What they ought to do is recognize the truth and success of a ship. Pick one port that's important. Sail to it. Then rest and refit for a little while, then sail to another important port. In this way, in not too many years, a man can set and reach his goals one by one until finally he's got a tremendous pile of accomplishments in which he can take pride. He's got all the things he wants, just because he had sense enough to realize he could only do well one thing at a time. There's one other point that fits in here, and maybe it's the most important of all. If a ship tied up to a dock, for some reason had no place to go, it would stay there until it fell apart from rust and disuse. Ships don't start their engines until they have some place to go, and here again it's the same with men. This is why it's so important that each of us have a port of call we want to reach, a goal, a place to get to that we feel will be better than the place in which we now find ourselves. If we don't, well, we might never cast off. We might never know the thrill of sailing a pre-charted course to a place we can't see for fully 99% of the journey. But we know it's there, and we know that if we keep sailing toward it, we'll reach it. You see, ships have a way of reaching their ports. If someone came up to you today and asked you what your next port of call is, that is, where you're going, could you answer him in one sentence like the captain could on the bridge of his ship? If not, maybe you'd better give it some thought. As soon as I was able and had the time to devote to it, I got a boat of my own. I find it to be a wonderfully restful hobby. With a good boat, you can own a home anywhere on Earth. Since 76% of the Earth's surface is covered by water, there are few places you can't go if you happen to love boats as I do. With our little ship, we have a home in Florida, the Bahamas, the Virgin Islands, the Grenadines, South America, Central America, or Mexico. It can take us wherever we want to go, with no packing and unpacking, with our meals when we want them, and good fishing and swimming along the way. And as Dana wrote back in 1830 in the American Classic 2 years before the mast, a ship is like a lady's watch, always out of repair, so you're never at a loss for something to do. There are always a dozen things waiting to be done. It makes for an interesting, busy hobby, with lots of fresh air and sunshine. It's especially good in the winter when you can't play golf up north. The great William James, in his Principles of Psychology, defined genius as little more than the faculty of perceiving in an unhabitual way. In his essay on habit, he referred to habit as the flywheel of society. It's what keeps us doing what we've been doing in the past. It makes us fear change regardless of the present condition of our lives. And the genius, as defined by Dr. James, seems to be that rare bird who knows that change is not only good, but inevitable. He anticipates the inevitable. He's perhaps what makes change inevitable. He habitually looks at everything about him in an unhabitual way. He takes nothing for granted. He knows that whatever he sees that is made by man or served by man is imperfect, is always in a state of evolving. Let me give you a good example. A friend of mine was looking for a site for a large luxury motel. He was in no hurry and spent months in a certain West Coast city looking for the site that would probably best guarantee a good return on the considerable amount of money he was going to invest and borrow. He found the perfect site. It was near a large university and at the confluence of 5 main roads, one of which was a heavily traveled highway. It was also within the city limits, which would mean a large local trade for the restaurant. There was only one hitch. On the site was an old brick building, an old manufacturing concern, still in business. Well, he called on the owners of the business and told them what he wanted to do. Since the city had, over the years, grown around the old building, he pointed out that it would be to their benefit to sell him the property at a price many times the land's original value and build themselves a new, more modern plant in a less congested area. Well, they saw the sense of his plan and a way to pick up nearly $500,000 for their property and closed the deal. He razed the old building and built his beautiful new motel. Later, he discovered that many people in the motel business had looked upon that site as ideal for their purposes, but had written it off because it was already occupied. He saw it not with the old brick manufactory on it, but instead with his beautiful new motel sitting there. He had looked at that corner in an unhabitual way. Everybody benefited, including the community, by his genius. I think each of us can greatly increase the value of his life by taking to heart Dr. James' definition of genius, by looking at things about us, in our home, and particularly in our work, with new eyes, with the eyes of creation. We can form the habit of seeing things not as they are, but as they perhaps will be, as they could be, as our changing world will insist they be in the future. Our lives are full of old brick buildings that have stood there for too long. We just don't see them anymore, or if we do, we just assume they'll always be there, and maybe they always will, if we don't do something about them. In case the idea impressed you as much as it did me, here's Dr. William James' definition of genius again. You might want to remember it. Genius is little more than the faculty of perceiving in an unhabitual way. Speaking of Dr. William James, he also had something to say about the interesting phenomenon known as second wind. In his essay on vital reserves, he points out that everyone knows what it is to start a piece of work, mental or physical, feeling stale, and we know what it is to warm up to a job. But before too long, we feel the first signs of fatigue. As Dr. James put it, we have then walked, played, or worked enough, so we desist. We simply quit. This sort of fatigue forms a kind of barrier behind which the great majority of people live and work. But if an unusual necessity forces us to press onward, as James put it, a surprising thing happens. The fatigue gets worse up to a certain critical point. Then gradually or suddenly, it passes away, and we're fresher than before. We have evidently tapped a level of new energy, a second wind, masked until then by the fatigue obstacle we usually obey. In fact, we may find that we have third and fourth winds. The phenomenon occurs in cases of mental activity as well as physical, and in exceptional cases we may find, beyond the very extremity of fatigue, distress, stores of ease and power we never dreamed ourselves to own. It's evident that we have stockpiled reserves of energy that are ordinarily not called upon, but that may be called upon, deeper and deeper strata of power, ready for use by anyone who probes so deeply. I remember one Sunday when I had to write 20 radio programs to be recorded on Monday. I got started at 9 in the morning, and by 5 in the afternoon I was bushed, but I had 10 more shows to write, so I kept at it. Suddenly, I felt better and had more energy than at any previous time, and by 1:30 the next morning, when I finally completed program number 20, I felt great. I felt I could keep going forever. 16.5 hours of steady mental work and typing, and I was fresher than when I started. Great things are done by so-called high-energy people, but I'm sure most of us don't know about or forget about the great reserves of energy which lie dormant in us. Each of us has a tremendous second wind, mentally and physically. Passing through the fatigue barrier to reach these deep reservoirs can make the difference between ordinary or unusual success, between existing and really living. It's good to know we have it. Imagination is everything in the income department, too. But as often as not, your best ideas will come from other people. Other people can make you rich if you listen to them. Other people not only have everything we want as far as income is concerned and will gladly give it to us if we'll earn it, they also have the ideas we need if we'll listen to them. Time and again during my business life, the ideas of others have proved to be of enormous value. One idea given to me many years ago by an acquaintance earned my company several $1 million. Another idea, a suggestion at lunch by another acquaintance, resulted in my daily radio program. Another idea worth millions. Others often see things we can do better than we can. We're often too close to ourselves and tend to take ourselves for granted. I don't mean that we should follow every suggestion made to us, not by any means. But every once in a while, someone can drop a handful of diamonds in our lap. We must still follow through with the idea, put it together, cover it with the necessary investment of time, thought, talent, and money. But without the suggestion, we might never have thought of it ourselves. Personal renewal demands that we maintain an open, free-flowing idea system, and we should be as free with our good ideas for others as we are in examining those passed along to us by friends and acquaintances. One idea can make us rich, so that we can then turn to the things we most want to do, if what we most enjoy is not connected with our work. To accomplish anything, as W. McNeill Dixon writes in his interesting book, The Human Situation, you need an interest, a motive, a center for your thoughts. You need a star to steer by, a course, a creed, an idea, a passionate attachment. Men have followed many guiding lights. They've been inspired by love of fame and love of country. They've pursued power, wealth, holiness. They've followed Christ, Muhammad, Napoleon. Something must beckon you or nothing is accomplished, something about which you ask no questions. Thought needs a fulcrum for its lever. Effort demands an incentive or an aim. We need to know our motive. I know mine, I think. Do you know yours? What makes following our ideas so interesting are the unexpected paths and byways and windfalls that occur along the way, the serendipitous events that unfailingly come to the person in pursuit of a goal. Serendipity means the faculty of making happy and unexpected discoveries by accident. The word was coined by the British author Horace Walpole, who based it on the title of an old fairy tale, The Three Princes of Serendip. The princes in the story were always making interesting discoveries while on a quest for something else. The secret of making serendipitous discoveries is to make certain we're following a star, a cause, a creed, or an idea. It's the secret of what the uninitiated call good luck. Just as ideas and imagination are the fountain of youth, being on a personal quest absolutely guarantees that unexpected good fortune will come our way from time to time. Whenever you hear of someone being lucky, a little investigation will show that the person is a busy, positive kind, looking for new and interesting ways of doing things. I remember reading that good luck is what happens when preparedness meets opportunity. People who pull in their heads and try to play it safe seldom learn about serendipity. Perhaps they wouldn't recognize it if it sat on their doorstep. The next time you hear someone say, "Don't stick your neck out," observe him closely. Chances are he's a rather dull and uninteresting person with little to recommend him. Sticking your neck out is the way to woo serendipity. A friend of mine, Skipper Hill of Miami, named his big trawler yacht Serendipity. A lot of boredom and frustration that's connected with work comes from not knowing more about it. Lurking somewhere within every line of work, there is tremendous opportunity, and if we'd only find a star to steer by, a goal worth working toward, we'll see more of it. One of the greatest explorers who ever lived, Captain James Cook, began as an ordinary seaman. In just 4 years, he had learned enough to become a master of his own ship and to later make the discoveries that made him famous. A happy, successful, serendipitous life began as a common seaman. The people who find a meaning, a deeper purpose in their work, find themselves deluged by good fortune. I suppose that's why just 5% of the people earn 40% of all the money in the country. What is the star by which I steer my life? A good question to ask from time to time. It may change as we mature and sort out the important from the unimportant, but a person without a goal is like a ship without a rudder. I talked to a class of kids in distributive education in Milwaukee not long ago, and afterwards a couple of fine, serious young men came backstage and asked, "But what if we don't have a goal?" And I suggested that they make the finding of a worthy goal their goal. It seemed to help. Another common seaman, Joseph Conrad, studied and worked his way to become a ship's captain. He later spent the long weeks at sea writing his great classic stories. Serendipity. We can put it to work in our lives whenever we wish. All we need is a quest, an odyssey. which is the name of my boat, incidentally. If you'd like to know more about the interesting subject of motivation, what motivates people today and what doesn't, by all means read the book I mentioned earlier, The Enjoyment of Management by John Price. He points out that motivating people has been with us for centuries. The 5 classic forms of motivation were practiced by such legendary greats as Cleopatra, Genghis Khan, Julius Caesar, and Moses. And for many centuries, these 5 motivators, pay, direction, discipline, underutilization, and diversion, work magnificently. Moses crossed the wilderness, Caesar conquered Gaul, and Cleopatra had her wily way, so naturally these heretofore highly efficient motivators continued into the Industrial Revolution and are still with us today. But do they still motivate? Well, let's see. Pay is income to the person for use as he determines, but he's influenced by a couple of things. Does he have full freedom to use pay in any manner he wants, or must he use all or part of it to fill obligatory demands such as the rent, car payments, the phone bill, and taxes? There isn't as much discretionary income there as some think. Pay in most people's minds is their due for the work they perform. It does not tend to change a person's behavior from median to maximum performance. Pay, then, is not a motivator. It motivates membership, and that's all. Money is what the employer uses to attract and hold people. It motivates them to come or to leave an organization, not to perform to the maximum of their ability. Denial of aspirations for independence of action through detailed direction will certainly motivate changes in organizational behavior. Unfortunately, the motivation will take a negative tack, leading to dissension and withdrawal of individual effort. Discipline, the 3rd classic motivator, still works, but it's much more difficult to apply today. The unions, changes in lifestyles, the lesser emphasis on material goals, all have contributed to a weakening of discipline as a motivational force. The biggest problem in our industrial society today, without qualification, is the underutilization of people in the workforce. It is, in itself, a monumental deterrent to maximum individual productivity. But far worse, it has a relationship with just about every aspect of the work situation: pay, discipline, direction, to cite the motivators we've already discussed, and also the full range of organizational goals, profit, production, morale, and so forth. The major effect of underutilization is turnover, and turnover, as any industrial leader will tell you, is the bane of his existence. The most talented young people, aware of the fact that they're not being fully utilized, quit. The young man has grown up without the problem or frustrations of his older boss who remembers the Depression. He's of a generation unique in sociological history, a generation without substantive problems of personal survival. Often the young men who stay are generally of a less aggressive nature, who eventually will extend the minimum of effort, which ultimately becomes fixed. If they're unable to channel their unused abilities elsewhere, they will, according to Parkinson's law, shrink to fit the job. And finally, diversion, getting people's minds off the unpleasant job, is fast becoming passé. So the 5 classic motivators that have been around since Moses, Julius Caesar, and Cleopatra are pay, direction, discipline, underutilization, and diversion. But in the rapidly changing world of today, they don't seem to work anymore. John Price tells us about 5 more, the stable motivators, which do. They are growth, achievement, responsibility, recognition, and work nature. First, growth. Growth is of 2 types, organizational growth and self-developmental growth. For the person to feel meaning in his job and thus give to that job the full measure of his ability requires that he sense the opportunity for promotion beyond his present job, organizational growth, and opportunity for the advancement of his own personal competence. He will, of course, sense opportunity only if there are, in fact, recognizable mechanisms for its realization. These mechanisms, quite simply, are discretionary awards, succession planning procedures, merit increase provisions, and personal development programs. 2. Achievement, according to some professionals in human behavior, is the most important of the needs for the organizational member. Unless the person senses that what he's doing is a contribution to a greater goal, that he is doing something that counts, he will very likely produce mediocrity. 3. A sense of responsibility is third of the 5 motivational needs which must be satisfied for maximum job performance. We do not, as a rule, delegate to people the freedom to act as responsible managers of their own jobs. Everybody is a manager if we think of management as involving the coordination of resources. So creating a feeling of importance and responsibility is the job of the manager today, and unless this feeling is created in the individual, one of the important elements will have been lost. 4. Recognition. The 5 most important words in the language are, I am proud of you. The 4 most important, what is your opinion? The 3 most important, if you please. And the 2 most important, thank you. These are all simple phrases, and they're pretty inexpensive ways to recognize individual performance with personal concern. 5, the last ingredient in the high-performance recipe, is work content, the nature of the job itself. Unless the person has a basic liking for the functions, the tasks, the mechanics of the work he performs, he cannot, by any stretch of the imagination, be motivated to perform at his highest achievement level. I don't mean to imply that the person who doesn't consider his work hobby-like is lost, motivationally speaking, but he must be in agreement with himself, if only subconsciously, on the fundamental desirability of what he's doing. No one can induce this last element. It must be there. We've always tended to look outside for the causes and solutions to the problems that confront us, rather than searching introspectively. You don't make an engine run better by polishing the block. Internal care is what counts. Now I'd like to quote something written by a business consultant friend of mine, Lawrence Harbeck, and published by the Wall Street Journal under the title, Some Plain Truth About Profit. I found it interesting not only for its valuable insights into the economics of free enterprise and the profit system, but also for the clarity with which they're presented, the almost total absence of professional jargon and technical gobbledygook. Free enterprise acknowledges human selfishness and directs it to constructive goals. Partisans of free enterprise claim this is a virtue. They believe selfishness is a fact of life. Opponents express horror at this pragmatic view. They believe government can eliminate human imperfection. Profit brings into sharpest focus the fight between free enterprise and socialism-communism. The battle lines seem to be clear, but they're not. Profit is a deceptive subject, and on no other topic are friends of free enterprise less convincing. Practical businessmen state forthrightly that profit makes the wheels go round. Opponents think they already know this too well, and the fact torments them. Academic proponents of free enterprise unintentionally encourage 2 negative inferences in their usual argument. They imply that profit exists only in a free enterprise system, and only there because of imperfections, and that the profit motive is synonymous with selfishness. For example, many textbooks say, profit is money left after cost is subtracted from selling price. This definition is narrowly accurate but broadly misleading. It sounds as if the seller is getting something for nothing. If the costs are met, why should there be a remainder? It implies by omission that profit is associated only with money and sales-oriented economic systems. Economic experts agree to disagree. They describe profits variously as high earnings from entrepreneurship, discrepancies arising from uncertainty, results of a monopoly position, return from a contrived scarcity, unnecessary surplus, implicit interest, rent, and wages, an accounting residual needed to balance earnings against the value of goods and services, and a mixture of these. None of this is helpful. As the profit concept is widely misunderstood or understood diversely, and an emotional issue, it must be approached with precision. A simple economic model is needed to permit discussion in basic English and short words. Tradition is helpful. It calls for economic analysis to begin with Robinson Crusoe. Consider the lone castaway. He has drinking water, but no food. At rest, his body uses material and energy equivalent to 1 fish per day. If he does not eat 1 fish per day, while resting, he will starve. He must work to catch fish. Now he pays a price for each day's effort. The price is extra material and energy used by his body while fishing. His efforts, successful or not, require a second fish each day. If he catches 2 fish each day, he will live. If his catch averages less than 2, he will die. If he catches a 3rd fish one day, it is profit. He can afford to rest the next day and not fish at all, or he can keep working and save his extra fish for the day when he gets less than 2. Or he can start to build a supply to allow him to stop fishing temporarily and make a net to improve his productivity. The extra fish, the profit, gives him the option of doing something other than fishing. Time is a factor in measuring profit. The preceding discussion defines it over a 24-hour day. We can also define it as occurring only during production, and conclude that the castaway makes a profit of 1 fish every 8-hour working day that he catches 2. It gives him the option of not fishing at night. The significant point is this. During a productive period, however defined, he produced more than he consumed. Profit is the difference between production and consumption of the producing unit while it is producing. Now, all living things and all organizations of living things must be profitable to exist. Bears, squirrels, and trees must make a profit in the summer to survive the winter and start producing again next spring. Life survives unprofitable periods only if production exceeded consumption during an earlier period. Profit achieved during 8 hours enables the worker to not work the remaining 16 hours of the day. The worker's profits permit his children to not work at all. Profit during good times, if not all removed, enables a business and the jobs it provides to continue during bad times. Profit is needed to start an enterprise. In new business, a bear cub and a plant seed owe their lives to profits generated before their birth. They could not come into existence or continue to exist at first, while still unprofitable, unless some other producer first generated a profit. Profit should not be confused with savings. Living things must save, if only in the form of fat, to survive profitless periods. But before they can save, they must profit. The real argument between free enterprise and socialism-communism is not about profit per se. All systems must profit to exist. The contentious issues are these. Who produces it? Who gets it? How is it used? And how are these decisions reached? Opinion on these questions should be developed and evaluated in the bright light of one glaring fact. No one gets it if there isn't any. Profit must precede allocation. It's pointless to give food stamps to poor people if farmers don't produce more food than farmers eat. Persons in government can't give a subsidy to an unprofitable activity unless they are first able to take a profit from some other enterprise. The total subsidy of some units of an economic system cannot exceed the profits of the others. Now, this hard fact applies equally to the castaway, families of bears, the United States, and all other nations, no matter what their economic and political structures. Nations living on the international dole are not exceptions. They're parts of larger economic systems. The finer things in life, sports, vacations, better homes, art, and so forth, and the so-called free things, welfare payments, low cost to the user government housing, foreign aid, and so forth, are possible only if profits occur first. It seems reasonable, therefore, that current profits should be distributed in a manner designed to encourage the continued and increasing availability of future profits. To achieve this objective, an economic system must take into account many things, including a few facts of human nature, such as, you cannot destroy incentive. You cannot stop the superior individual's efforts to excel his fellow men. With taxes, laws, and regulations, you may be able to destroy his incentive to make a profit, but this forces him to express his superiority through less productive actions. People expect to benefit directly and commensurately from their own productivity. Within the limits of their profitability, they provide for their families. Few are willing to give a large share of their profit to strangers. Saints appear from time to time, but most of us do not qualify. Organizations based on the assumption that humans are saintly, or can be taught or legislated to be saintly, do not function as planned. They change or cease to exist. Often they become totalitarian in an effort to force people to be saintly. Precisely half the people are below average in ability. As a group, they produce much less than half of total profit. They are willing but unable. These underachievers must be given a greater share of profit than they produce, or in their frustration, they will diminish or destroy total profitability. They can do this by vote or direct action. They're not stupid. Given a chance to understand the choice, they will elect to dine on 25% of a turkey rather than 50% of a sparrow. Free enterprise comes closest to balancing these and other items, many of them conflicting, and is the most productive economic system. Idealists who confuse profits and selfishness often follow this pattern. They avoid profit-making jobs, seek profit-using careers, and clamor simultaneously for government action to prevent others from generating profits. The analogy would be to destroy part of the food and water in a lifeboat because the rowers are getting larger shares than those who cannot or will not help row the boat to safety. If someone wants to help the poor, he should start a new enterprise or work with an existing one to create more jobs and profits. The extra jobs and increased production will provide more help than will militant marching and loud-mouthed sympathy. If a person hopes to use profits as a government employee or a social worker, for example, he should be sure that his political actions do not discourage efficient producers from supplying the profits that permit him to appear altruistic. He should support the economic system that can best support him and those he wishes to help. Free enterprise is superior to socialism and communism in many ways, including profitability. It is not superior because it is profitable, however, but because it is more profitable. When John D. Rockefeller was in his 50s, making $1 million a week, he was told by his physician that unless he changed his living habits, he wouldn't be around much longer to enjoy his rapidly accumulating fortunes. The doctor gave Mr. Rockefeller 3 simple pieces of advice, and, as is often the case, in their simplicity was woven a profound wisdom. This is what Mr. Rockefeller was told. 1. Push yourself away from the table while you're still a little bit hungry. 2. Stop worrying. And 3. Get some regular physical exercise. And that was it. Now, I'd imagine if you went to your doctor to get a complete medical checkup using the latest diagnostic equipment, and if you were given the same advice as Mr. Rockefeller, you'd check off your doctor as a country quack and go out in search of some more sophisticated recommendations. Well, you needn't do that. For there were sophisticated recommendations in the 3-fold prescription given to John D. Rockefeller, and he recognized them. His doctor, in a sense, was a prophet. Strange as it may seem, the health of modern Western man is being destroyed by 3 things: overeating, excessive worrying, and a sedentary existence. In the next 2 issues of Direct Line, I'll be talking about the problems of obesity and anxiety as they relate to health. But for now, let's see if we can get some of the sitters out there off their seats and onto their feet. Let's explore together the possibilities available in our daily lives for increased physical activity. As nearly as I've been able to figure it, there are just 4 basic ways in which a person can find the physical activity his body needs to function at its best. If you can think of others, you might let me know, but for now, here are the 4. The first way is through our daily work. We can get regular physical activity through our work. But the problem is, who works for a living anymore? What I mean, of course, is who toils for a living anymore. Chances are you probably don't, for the opportunities for making a living through physical labor are rapidly disappearing. Don't misunderstand me. I don't mean you don't work hard. You probably work very hard at your job. But what I'm asking is how much muscular strength or endurance does it take to accomplish your work successfully? What demand is put on your heart and lungs? What amount of caloric expenditure is required in your daily occupation? The answer for 9 out of 10 of us is simply that my work does not provide enough physical activity to meet the requirements for keeping my body dynamically healthy. Now, historically, this is a new development. For thousands of years, man had to toil for his livelihood. But even with the fitness rewards from physical labor being what they are, I'm sure we wouldn't care to go back to those conditions. Today, in order to offset the loss of physical activity that has beset man in this era, we need to find a suitable substitute for physical work. And that's where the other 3 ways come in. The second way to increase physical activity, and the most obvious, is through a planned exercise program. This can include joining a group at the YMCA, the Park and Recreation Department, or at your local community center. Or it could be a personal program of regular calisthenics, yoga, jogging, or any of a number of other activities pursued at your local health club or in and around your home. These are the activities most people think of when you mention the word exercise. But calisthenics, jogging, yoga, or isometrics should never, by themselves, be equated with the much broader term, exercise. As fine and helpful as these activities are, they also have an important drawback. They're boring. There's nothing very exciting about staring at your navel for 15 minutes or grunting your way through 25 sit-ups. Yes, they're boring, especially when you're working at them alone without the experience to interject variety. It's formal exercises like these that cause most of our exercise dropouts. As valuable as they can be to any person, and most people will tell you they never feel better than when they're working out, it still takes a special kind of person to be faithful to a program that turns out to be little more than tedious work. But exercise that is vigorous physical activity need not be tedious. This brings us to the third way to get increased physical activity into our lives. The most palatable form of exercise is through sports and recreation. Besides the pure fun of what you're doing, there are tremendous rewards that come from activities like swimming, backpacking, tennis, handball, cycling, badminton, square dancing, judo, skiing, volleyball, and other activities which are strenuous enough to condition you while you're enjoying the participation. Developing a high level of personal fitness requires forming exercise habits, and what habits are easier to develop than those that are fun? Investigate the opportunities available in your community. If you're not familiar with a certain sport and you feel you might enjoy it, there are probably instruction courses available somewhere. If not, there are usually people more than willing to teach you their favorite activity if you just show the interest. But sports, with all of their positive values, do take extra time and often require special facilities. The last of our ways of getting more exercise requires neither of these. This family of exercise opportunities is called built-ins. They can be the answer to a frantically busy person finding the time to do it. Anyone can put built-ins into many of his daily routine tasks. Sandwich them in regularly, and they become a habit, and they take no additional time. Let me give some examples. Try holding your stomach in whenever you're waiting for a red light, or while you're walking. How about riding an exercise bike while you're watching television? Why not use the time it takes to draw your bath water for doing sit-ups or push-ups? One of my exercise friends has a routine he follows each morning while he's getting ready for work. It includes half knee bends while he's brushing his teeth, rising on his toes while washing his face and lathering his beard, toe-touching and stretching while the wash basin is filling, and isometric exercises for his stomach, seat, and legs while shaving. By the way, he also performs isometrics while he's listening to his direct line tapes. Sounds strange? Well, it really isn't. It's simply using to the best advantage that most precious commodity of all, time. With a little imagination, you can find the same kinds of opportunities to add physical activity to your routine functions. You just have to think active. Now, any one of the four areas mentioned, your work, formal exercise, sports and recreation, and built-ins, could provide you with adequate activity to maintain a high state of physical fitness. But the most successful and lasting activity program will undoubtedly combine all four. It takes some planning and commitment, but you can reach whatever level of activity and fitness you really desire. Remember, physical fitness is an unusual commodity. You can't buy it, borrow it, or steal it. And once you have it, you can't even store it. To possess it, you must make regular activity a daily habit and physical exertion a part of your life. John D. Rockefeller did. He took the advice of his physician in all three areas. He watched his diet, he sought a more positive approach to problem-solving to eliminate worry, and he engaged in physical activity almost daily until he was 90 years of age. These three simple yet profound suggestions given to John D. Rockefeller by his physician turned his life from one of deteriorating health to one of dynamic living. And you know, that way of life is available to each of us. Now to close Direct Line 2, here's an idea if you've been wanting to get away from it all and have the time to get some good ideas. Take your family on a trip around the world. It was done not long ago by a 39-year-old telephone equipment maintenance man. Here was what seemed to be a very average man with a very average family working a very average paying job to make ends meet. But the man and his wife decided to take the whole family on a trip around the world, so they sold practically everything they owned, including their home. It produced $8,500, as I recall, $7,000 of which they used on the trip. They boarded a freighter, sailed to Hawaii, the Fiji Islands, then Australia, then a 43-day trip by passenger liner around Australia to Ceylon, India, Arabia, the Suez Canal, that was before the Middle East problem, through the Mediterranean to southern France, Gibraltar, London, and so on. They got home with nothing but $1,500 and the will to start all over again from scratch. He had obtained a 6-month leave of absence from his company. They are delighted with what they did, and they may even do it again someday. Thank you. One of my favorite publications is a small weekly called simply Menace, which I highly recommend. In its issue of June 28, 1972, in its book review section, it recommended The Educated Imagination, a book of lectures given some years ago for the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation by Northrop Frye, which I subsequently ordered and read and also recommend. Northrop Frye speaks of 3 uses of language. Now, the first has to do with simple awareness of the facts of life and is made up mostly of nouns and adjectives. This language provides an inventory of what's out there. Its concern is with what is. Then there's the practical language of what one must do to get along in the world, how to relate to the environment. And in its most developed form, this is the language of science. Finally, there's the language of what might be, the language of what we're able to imagine could be. Now, all forms of language use the power of imagination, but only the third includes the major works of the imagination. In its other uses, imagination is more of a practical tool, not the designing architect of the creative intelligence. Now, Fry's book is concerned with the importance of having an educated imagination. By an imagination schooled through conscious practice, the reach of the mind is extended beyond all ordinary limits. Now, let me repeat that. By an imagination schooled through conscious practice, the reach of the mind is extended beyond all ordinary limits. Matthew Arnold, Fry recalls, distinguished between the environment and what he termed culture. The environment is what is, call it the status quo, or from another viewpoint, the establishment. But culture is made up of the vision of men, the best that has been thought and said. An environment without a horizon of culture would soon be fatal to human beings. For while we have obvious need to know how to relate to what is, never to imagine going beyond it would dehumanize us. Of the day-to-day level of what is, Fry says, on this level we use words to say the right thing at the right time, to keep the social machinery running, faces saved, self-respect preserved, and social situations intact. It's not the noblest thing that words can do, but it's essential, and it creates and diffuses a social mythology, which is a structure of words developed by the imagination. For we find that to use words properly, even in this way, we have to use our imaginations, otherwise they become mechanical cliches and get further and further removed from any kind of reality. There's something in all of us, and I think this is important. There's something in all of us that wants to drift toward a mob, where we can all say the same thing without having to think about it, because everybody is all alike except people that we hate or persecute. Every time we use words, we're either fighting against this tendency or giving into it. Now, when we fight against it, we're taking the side of genuine and permanent civilization. The power of the imagination is the means by which resistance to this retrograde tendency is strengthened. If the imagination is not made to flow into disciplined channels, avenues defined by vision, then its uses are degraded to unworthy, even if apparently spectacular purposes. As Fry puts it, the civilization we live in at present is a gigantic technological structure, a skyscraper almost high enough to reach the moon. It looks like a single worldwide effort, but it's really a deadlock of rivalries. It looks very impressive, except that it has no genuine human dignity. For all of its wonderful machinery, we know it's really a crazy ramshackle building, and at any time may crash around our ears. Now, what the myth tells us is that the Tower of Babel is a work of the human imagination, that its main elements are words, and that what will make it collapse is a confusion of tongues. All had originally one language, the myth says. That language is not English or Russian or Chinese or any common ancestor, if there was one. It's the language of human nature, the language that makes both Shakespeare and Pushkin authentic poets, that gives a social vision to both Lincoln and Gandhi. It never speaks unless we take the time to listen in leisure, and it speaks only in a voice too quiet for panic to hear. And then, all it has to tell us when we look over the edge of our leaning tower is that we're not getting any nearer heaven, and that it's time to return to earth. Let's pick out the main points of that tremendously important and original theme. First, there are three languages. The first has to do with simple awareness of the facts of life and is made up mostly of nouns and adjectives. This language provides an inventory of what is out there. Its concern is with what is. Then secondly, there's the language, the practical language of what one must do to get along in the world, how to relate to the environment. And in its most developed form, this is the language of science. It's the language of our work. And on this level, we use words to say the right thing at the right time, to keep the social machinery running, faces saved, self-respect preserved, and social situations intact. It's not the noblest thing that words can do, but it's essential. Hello there, good morning, how you feeling? Great, me too. Rotten weather, isn't it? Right. Well, there's something in us all that wants to drift toward a mob, where we can all say the same thing without having to think about it, because everybody is all alike, except people that we can hate or persecute, and every time we use words, we're either fighting against this tendency or giving into it. And when we fight against it, we're taking the side of genuine and permanent civilization. I have a saying framed in my office that reads, "Never, for the sake of peace and quiet, deny your own experience or convictions." It was written by Dag Hammarskjöld, late Secretary General of the United Nations. The easy thing is to go along with the gang, laugh at their jokes, and agree with their prejudices, just be a good old boy or girl, one of the gang. It's the easiest way on earth to never amount to much, and kid yourself into believing that at least you're doing as well as the other fellows. People who have never taken the hard road to self-discovery, lacking an identity of their own, find comfort in losing themselves within the larger identity of the group. This is the person who says, in effect, "I don't know who I am or where I'm going, but at least I'm a member of good old such-and-such organization. Yes, sir." As Manus puts it, the power of the imagination is the means by which resistance to this retrograde tendency is strengthened. If the imagination is not made to flow into disciplined channels, avenues defined by vision, then its uses are degraded to unworthy, even if apparently spectacular purposes. For the third language is the language of what might be, the language of what we're able to imagine could be. It's the language of hope. It's the language with which we formulate worthy goals and ideals. It's the designing architect of the creative intelligence. It's the universal language which speaks to all of us during those moments when we reach unusual peaks of human aspiration and genius. As Fry puts it, that language is not English or Russian or Chinese or any common ancestor if there was one. It's the language of human nature, the language that makes both Shakespeare and Pushkin authentic poets, that gives a social vision to both Lincoln and Gandhi. It never speaks unless we take the time to listen in leisure. And it speaks only in a voice too quiet for panic to hear. And then, all it has to tell us, when we look over the edge of our leaning tower, is that we're not getting any nearer heaven, and that it's time to return to earth. Time to return to earth. Now, I'll buy that, and I think you will too. It's time to tear away the phony tinsel and chrome and junk and cheap plastic from our lives and find the big, moving, pulsing life that has been so sicklied o'er, hidden away in the hold while most of so-called civilized humanity has been on a silly pleasure cruise to nowhere. Yes, I think it's time we return to earth. As far as the man-created problems, the same technology that created them can overcome and do away with them, when it's finally coordinated on a worldwide basis. It should start in America because Americans are the world's champion polluters. And it has started here with remarkable results. Do you know I found more eye-burning and irritating smog in the city of Johannesburg, South Africa, than I've ever experienced in Los Angeles. And it's the same in Tokyo, London, Paris, and Rome. The west coast of Italy is a cesspool, and no more birds can be found near the harbor at Genoa, and they've been living on that coast for thousands of years. We're the world champion polluters of the air and water because of our highly developed and sophisticated technology. But I have no doubt whatever that the same technology will make the North American continent the cleanest on Earth within 50 years. We are returning to Earth. We're realizing that just as the mind and body are inseparable and interacting agencies, so are the Earth and man. And the industries that clean up America can also clean up the world and give us new and serendipitous industries as great as any we have known in the past that could help the balance of payments. But now, how about you and me and our families? Can we listen to that third language, the language that never speaks unless we take the time to listen in leisure, the voice that speaks too softly for panic to hear, and when we listen to it, all it has to tell us when we look over the edge of our leaning tower is that we're not getting any nearer heaven and that it's time to return to earth. I'm certain that Mr. Fry uses the word heaven here in its metaphorical sense, that we're not getting any nearer to the kind of world a creature with the brains and ingenuity of man should be able to create for himself. Someone said, man can swim faster and deeper than the fish, he can fly faster and higher than the birds, he can tunnel deeper and with more efficiency into the earth than can any burrowing creature. The only thing he hasn't learned how to do is walk on the earth like a man. But by an imagination schooled through conscious practice, the reach of the mind is extended beyond all ordinary limits. Now, this tells us that with practice, the reach of our imagination, the reach of our minds, can be extended beyond all ordinary limits. It's true. And as we've said before, imagination is everything. So let's return to earth through the exercise of an expanded imagination. What's important to you? What, and forget all about language number 2 here, the language that says the so-called right thing at the right time. Face is saved, self-respect preserved, and social situations intact, what's the most important thing in the world to you, really? Not what the community expects from you or your neighbors or your family, but what's important to you. What has that quiet voice been saying to you when you've taken the time and leisure to listen to it? Hasn't it been something that you know down deep in the very fibers of your being is true for you? Then remember what Thoreau said. You have only to move in the direction of your dreams to meet with a success unexpected in common hours. Emerson told us to trust that voice within, to trust our own intelligence and that small, still voice that tries so hard to get us on the right track, and which we so often fight to maintain the status quo, the dreary lives of what Thoreau called quiet desperation. The chances are that what the voice is trying to tell you to do is also best for everyone concerned, the community, your family, everyone in the long run. So then, through the systematic exercise of our imaginations, let's return to Earth, our Earth, that place that is right for us, and that will bring us the joy and fulfillment we seek. Think. Relax. Become as serene as you can and listen to the voice that never speaks unless we listen in leisure. Gradually, through a little daily exercise with practice, the reach of our minds can be extended beyond all ordinary limits. We'll be able to see through the obvious to the truth beyond, the truth for us. Now let's go back to something I said earlier. For while we have an obvious need to know how to relate to what is, never to imagine going beyond it would dehumanize us. Now, in my opinion, only an infinitesimal fraction of humanity uses the most amazing and perhaps least understood human faculty, the one which enables us to bring about, through the educated use of the imagination, a new and better life, the achievement of new, interesting, exciting goals. And it's when we learn to use this faculty, this seeming miracle of creation, that we become fully alive, fully human. Now, it's here that the imagination is made to flow into disciplined channels, avenues defined by vision. When we throw an electrical switch, we expect things to happen, the lights to go on or off, the motor surges to humming life. We take electricity for granted. It's there, it works. The fact that no one knows what electricity is doesn't bother anyone any more than the fact that our heart will pump in response to an electrical synapse 103,680 times a day, some 38 million times a year for 80 years or so. It's all a complete and total mystery. There's not a single human being alive who understands one blessed thing about it. Sometime in the middle of the 4th month of gestation, a quiet little heart begins suddenly to beat. No one knows how or why. It is a total mystery, period. That there is a connection between all living substances has been demonstrated. A polygraph expert, one who's skilled in the use of the so-called lie detector, has demonstrated that houseplants know when you decide to come home from a shopping trip and react in their own emotional way to that fact. When you dump live brine shrimp into boiling water, they seem to faint before they hit the water that will kill them. And at the same instant, the plants throughout the house react violently to the murder being committed in the kitchen. Now, all of this is a rather circuitous way of saying that there's much that we do not understand. That's an understatement that may well win first prize for the century. What we do know compared to what we do not know was cleverly demonstrated by the distinguished inventor and scientist Charles Kettering before an audience of engineers one time. He had a stage backdrop made, which consisted of a great shining sheet of stainless steel, perhaps 30 by 50 feet in size. He took a metal stylus, and going to a corner of the sheet, he made a tiny, almost invisible mark. He then told his audience that the mark he had just made was meant to represent all that science had accomplished to the present time, while the great, pristine, untouched expanse of the sheet of stainless steel was intended to represent what was yet to be discovered. He probably overestimated what we've accomplished. Let's open our minds to the undeniable fact that man is just taking his first shaky, tentative steps into knowledge. You don't need to know what electricity is to read your evening paper or be able to see your way after dark. You don't need to know what keeps your heart beating without your having to think about it for 80-some years, give or take a few. And now I want you to understand that there is a mysterious stuff in which we live, as ubiquitous as the air itself, that responds to the way we habitually think. Now, I don't know what it is. I don't think anybody knows what it is. But it's there, and it works. It's a magic kind of stuff that creates out of itself that which we demand, whether we know we're demanding it or not. It's also the opponent of which Huxley spoke when he compared life to a game of chess. You know, he said our opponent is always fair and just, and would rather we win than lose, but who cannot overlook the smallest mistake or ignorance. He said those who play well are paid with that sort of overflowing generosity with which the strong delight in strength. But those who play ill are checkmated, without haste, but without remorse. A man named Clifford Eccles had dreamed for years of going into business for himself. All his life he'd worked as a clerk in a grocery store for a small salary. One day he ran across a quotation by Emerson that got him off dead center. The quotation was, "Do the thing, and you will have the power. But they that do not the thing have not the power." Well, he mortgaged everything he had, arranged for some credit from the necessary suppliers, and a few years later was doing $1 million a year in business. He said later, "As I started to do the things I'd been thinking and dreaming about, I began to discover that I had hidden talents and abilities I'd never suspected. Ideas came to me that I was able to turn into more successful business. In short, when I had enough faith to start to do the thing, I did find that I had the power. I'd had it all along and hadn't realized it." Well, there's an important lesson there. It's only when we actually begin something that we find we have the power and the talent to carry it off. As long as we sit and think about it, wish for it, and stay where we are, nothing happens. Even Michelangelo said if people only knew how hard I worked to gain mastery, it wouldn't seem wonderful at all. And perhaps the distinguished Somerset Maugham put it best when he wrote, "It's a funny thing about life. If you refuse to accept anything but the best, you very often get it." We get out of life about what we expect from it, and the endless diversity of expectations is what makes life and its possibilities so interesting. Most people never learn how to play this game of life. Few learn how to play it the way we probably could. If we were really aware of our own powers, we'd live in a continuous state of awe. But most people, those in the big crowd, play the game of life for peanuts when they could be enjoying a banquet. It's too bad, but that's the way it is. The people who never learn how to win at this game of life are those logical, practical, pragmatic people who never jump unless they've got a clear picture of where they're going to land. Play it safe is their motto, and by playing it safe, as they call it, they miss the banquet. Willard F. Rockwell, Jr., the dynamic and brilliant chairman of the board and chief executive officer of the North American Rockwell Corporation, in his excellent book, The 12 Hats of a Company President, What It Takes to Run a Company, published by Penn Hall, says, "The best soothsayer in the world is still guessing. Face it, and train yourself to guess. After you collect all the facts, analyze them rationally, but don't be afraid to add the slightly mysterious ingredient of intuition. Pull up the hood on your toga. When something tells you that an event is going to work out in a certain way, try to figure out what it is that makes you feel that way. Let your intuition take over at times. It may be highly creative whether you entirely understand the process or not. Know in a life where death is inevitable, don't ever play it safe. Play it well. Play it intelligently if you can. Play it courageously and play it for all it's worth, but don't play it safe. We've all got security locked in. It's just down the road. We'll be safe and secure beyond problems and pain forever before too long. To win at chess or golf or tennis or life, you have to make moves. You have to go on the offensive. You have to take chances. There's no way on earth to figure the result of every move in advance, and you're not going to win them all. There's just no way. You've got to lose a little, too. It's the people who won't take the chance of losing who rule out the chance of winning. Sometimes it seems as though the majority of people think it's some kind of a sin to be wrong or to admit that you've been wrong about something or make a mistake. The mature person laughs, admits he was wrong, that he made a bad move or a damn fool mistake, and goes right ahead trying to do better the next time. And if he's wise, he knows about this mysterious stuff, or thinks he knows about it, that over the long haul will give him what he's made up his mind to get. And he knows that sometimes this stuff moves in strange and mysterious ways. He's going to get a hunch to move this way or that way occasionally without knowing why. Call it intuition, a hunch, whatever. And if he's wise, he'll move. He does his best to collect what answers he can in front, but he knows he can't get them all. Life just doesn't reveal the back of the book. We must take our stand and then wait to be rewarded or knocked flat, whichever the case may be. For those who strive for the top, it's important to remember that it can be reached just as satisfactorily within a large organization as it can in a business of one's own, often even more so. The chances of a person building anything approaching the size of some of our larger corporations during his own lifetime or pulling down the kind of income he can earn in a large organization are not always very good. It's unlikely that Mr. Wilson could have built another General Motors on his own during his own working lifetime. nor is it likely that he would have amassed the millions or earned $600,000 a year as an entrepreneur. He did it all as an employee of a large company. Moreover, with the resources that a large company can command, projects can be embarked upon and satisfactions derived that would be difficult or impossible in a smaller organization. In a study to find out what makes those who get to the top so valuable, the Harvard Business School concluded that those who lead are not just problem solvers, they're problem finders. And if you think about the people who have scored big in the business world over the past century, you recognize them as problem finders or identifiers. We tend to take problems for granted and put up with them as part of the world we have to live with. The problem identifier is one who's conscious of problems and isolates them and casts about for a solution, who trains the reach of his imagination. I saw a signboard recently advertising a Suzuki motorcycle. The caption read, "It solves the boredom problem," or words to that effect. Now, boredom is a problem with young people today. Here was an advertising agency identifying the problem and offering a solution. We hear people say, young people are bored today. The problem identifier sees that condition not only as a social problem, but also as a business opportunity. In a study made many years ago by Notre Dame, if my memory serves me correctly, it was discovered that while executives were usually worth their higher salaries, in that they had the ability to solve problems and emerge victorious from crises when they arose, they seldom or never thought creatively between crises. They were reactors to problems, and were typical of people in management generally. They would not run from or turn away from crises or problems. They'd tear right into them with brains and confidence, and like the airline pilot who in 30 seconds will earn his salary for a year by overcoming with skill and courage a hairy problem that suddenly arises, but perhaps much of the rest of the time is content to just sit back and drive. They represent the backbone of the industries they represent, and we'd be out of business without them. But they seldom form the habit of isolating problems that need solving before they develop. Frequently, our worst enemies when it comes to doing some of the things we might find a great deal of growth and fun doing are our friends, relatives, even our parents. We seem to know intuitively that there's a big opportunity-filled world out there, but parents and relatives, in their desire to protect us from harm, think they're doing us a favor when they tell us to chicken out and take the safer middle road. You have a fertile field for neuroses when a young person knows the world is full of adventure and his parents keep after him to become a CPA. May the powers that be save us from well-meaning friends, relatives, and parents. They have no more reason to prescribe a lifetime career for us than we would have prescribing a career for them. And it often seems that those who have themselves missed the boat and find themselves living small and dreary lives are the quickest to suggest a route for us. Or what is just as bad, blowing our good ideas out of the box when we're naive enough to try them out on them. Emerson wrote something to the effect that no one ever falls ill, but that passers-by do not idly hope that he will die. And something similar could be written about seeking advice from people little qualified to give it. I have a small wooden box on my desk where visitors can see it, and on the top is the word advice. And when you go to open it, you find that it's simply a solid block of wood. It cannot be opened. There's no advice. Not today, or any day. There is one exception in the advice department, and that's a book you should read by L. Rust Hills, which is interestingly entitled, How to Do Things Right. To quote from the author's introductory note, "You'll find all the answers here, no matter what the question that's bothering you, whether it be how to save your marriage, what to do about America's industrial growth, how you can be absolutely certain your alarm will go off in the morning, or how to counteract the chaos and immorality of modern life." The book is wonderfully funny, but there's also much meat in it. Let me quote briefly from pages 25 and 26 on the importance of order in our lives. "What I mean by order," he writes, "when I'm being serious, is not neatness and tidiness and cleanliness, not the every chair in place, polished ashtrays, never an open book left lying in the so-called but misnamed living rooms of upper-middle-class suburbs of medium-sized Midwestern cities. There's no beauty there, no life either. Everyone's down in the cellar in the pseudo-pine-paneled, also misnamed playroom watching TV. What I do mean by order is not taking on more than you can manage without still being able to do what you really want. What order is not purchasing a lot more stuff than you can fairly easily pay for, not because debts are bad as such, but because they end up worrying you, and because you don't really need the stuff anyway, and you have to maintain it and lug it around with you and get it fixed when it breaks. Order is the opposite of complicating. It's simplifying. Order is not getting deeply entangled with another woman so you don't get her problems on top of your own. Order is like not wasting a lot of time trying to find things. Order's avoiding a lot of recriminations because you didn't do something you said you would, and maybe it's not saying you'll do a lot of things to begin with. Order is scrupulousness and meticulousness in arrangements with others, so neither of you is disappointed. It's doing things right or fairly right. It's establishing, so far as possible, a sensible, regular, regulated, ongoing household, so the family can come and go in freedom, knowing there's definitely a place to come back to and what it'll be like when they get there, get home. Order is not having to worry too much that you've forgotten something again. Basically, what order is not getting in over your head. Order is definitely not things like regimentation and repression. Order is freedom, or at least freeing. One last time. Order is not an aspect of compulsion, but of tranquility. The tranquility that permits you to do what you really want. The trouble is that disorder in our lives accumulates so gradually that by the time it bugs us, it seems too late to do anything about it, and we're not sure we want to anyway. This is especially so in our married lives, but it's true of other aspects too, our business and general busyness. The growing complexity seems a natural part of growing older and assuming responsibility. Children, promotions, possessions are in fact all very much wanted when they arrive. A lot of the things we own, the extra car, the summer house, the children's TV, are acquired in the delusion that they will make things better, and especially ironic, easier. They ultimately do not, of course, because most of these conveniences, so-called, do not simplify, but further complicate. Disappointment leads to dissatisfaction, which leads to disillusionment, which leads to something quite like desperation and despair, and it all gets to be too much. One is in over one's head and simply must get out. I suggest you add How to Do Things Right to your library. You'll enjoy the book immensely. It'll have you and your spouse laughing together, but it also makes a lot of sense. The author, L. Russ Tales, makes the extremely perspicacious point that people get divorced for, of all things, companionship. And he's right. The person wants a divorce, he or she says, because he or she wants to simplify his or her life. One of the curious things about the English language is that there's no word for both male and female. And once you get into that he or she business, things can get ridiculous. If you just say he, as we were taught to do when we wanted to include both sexes, the women's lib people jump all over you. And speaking of divorce, in a recent radio program, I quoted the following statistics. For every 1,000 new marriages in the United States during a recent 4-month period, there were 455 divorces. In Montana, there were 803 divorces per 1,000 new marriages. In Oregon, 768. In California, the most populous state, there were more than 3 divorces granted for every 4 new marriages. More than 3 out of 4. And according to an article by James H. Bowman, religion writer for the Chicago Daily News, in which he quotes William Grendyke, director of casework for the Catholic Family Consultation Service, people threaten divorce sometimes to get a response. Practically everyone who comes in here, says Grendyke, says he or she cannot communicate. The ultimate in demanding communication, he says, is to say divorce. That will usually get attention and produce some kind of response. The main reason for the epidemic proportions of divorce in this country seem to be lack of communications. Another big factor in the zooming divorce statistics is the fact that people aren't tolerating bad marriages anymore, the fact that the marriages are bad being usually their own fault notwithstanding. Many younger couples are not willing to put up with what they consider to be a bad or even mediocre marriage. The facts seem to indicate that they become bored with one another. Communications break down because both of them have said all they know to say, they've depleted their respective memory banks, and then sit in silence, reading or watching the tube. Unlike the Canada goose, humans do not tend to mate for life, at least not anymore. Another cause of divorce is rising affluence. Money is a tremendous contributor to divorce. Speaking of divorce, I agree with Mr. Hills, who in his book writes, I've nothing against divorce, God knows. It's the unhappiness that causes the divorce that I find hateful. And he suggests that what causes this unhappiness is the inability to cope, the impossibility of keeping on top of all the things that keep popping up, the sad inadequacy of our efforts to keep together in our lives and to keep our lives together. And what causes this inability to cope, this disorder, is the complexity of the way we attempt to live. Another good reason for the theme of this issue of Direct Line, which is to return to Earth to further simplify our lives. There have been a number of studies which have shown that a person who experiences a cluster of life crises runs a 75% or higher risk of becoming sick in the next year or two. The more serious the crises, the more serious will be the illness. Unless a person can learn to let crises run off his back like water on a duck. It's not easy, and no matter how phlegmatic we become, there are going to be some life crises that will affect us deeply. People tend not to connect the effect, the accident or illness, with the cause, the crises, because of the time lag. A good friend of mine underwent a serious and protracted business failure. He's an extremely happy, easygoing person. 2 years later, he developed a bleeding ulcer. Now, so much time had elapsed since the business failure, he didn't connect the two events until it was brought to his attention. It takes the body a long time sometimes to complete its physiological reaction to mental or emotional problems. I understand that North Australian Aborigines have never connected the sex act with the birth of a child, the two being separated by 9 months. Since they do not keep domestic animals, which is where it's believed human beings first began to put two and two together, they believe pregnancy is caused by a woman's inadvertently looking at a particular mountain in the region. Because of their belief, women sleep with their backs to the mountain and go about their days with eyes averted. And when they get pregnant, they believe they must have looked at the mountain without realizing it or faced it during their sleep. Undergoing a serious mental stress should remind us that illness or accident will follow unless we're able to quickly shake it off. So daily practice in keeping calm and collected is an excellent method for maintaining good mental and physical health. It will also result in many other benefits on the job and at home. Try the deep breath method. You've seen athletes do that when things get a big tense. All experienced athletes do. It's a good relaxant. C. Northcote Parkinson has written about a major discovery he made in clinical medicine. The busiest people have no time to be sick. Executives who are or think they are indispensable at the office have minor indispositions that begin Friday night and disappear by Monday morning. Their major illnesses immediately follow the end of some major task, and if the work continues at crisis level, they do not fall sick at all. They become as immune as physicians during an epidemic, mothers with large families, or sailors during a gale at sea. This fact would convince us, even if we didn't already suspect, that there's a voluntary element in many an illness. The patient has dropped his subconscious guard and allowed himself to collapse. He wants a rest and can see no other way to get it. The mother of 7 small children was asked, "What would happen if you got sick?" And she replied, "I have no time to be sick." Our bodies operate best, it seems, when there's a great deal to do, when we're challenged, when there's a goal involved. Take these away and apathy and introspection set in. We're turned in upon ourselves, and we can usually find something to be sick about, sick physically or miserable and sick emotionally, and then sick physically. Here's something from my friend Chris Haggerty that I liked. He said, "The goal of most leaders is to cause people to think more of the leader. The goal of the exceptional leader is to cause people to think more of themselves. And that's true whether you're leading a family, a business, an athletic team, or any other group of people. If a person wants to assess his leadership qualifications, here's a good place to begin." Young people are often bothered by their consideration of their value as persons. It's easier for an adult to assess his own worth to society and to his family, but a youngster who lives as a satellite of the family, who produces no income, who does nothing more constructive than maybe go to school and perform a few chores, often suffers from a sense of doubt as to his real worth as a person. And we need to reinforce the fact that he is important to us, and that he can be of considerable importance as he grows older, that he can make a substantial contribution to his world, country, and society, as well as to himself and his own family someday. This applies to daughters, of course, as well as to sons. A good little story to pass along to our kids is the one about the bar of iron. As a bar of iron, it may be worth, let's say, $5. The same piece of iron made into horseshoes would sell for $10.50. If made into needles, it would be worth $5,000. And if it's turned into balance springs for watches, it would have a total value of about $250,000. The genius and workmanship of man can bring value out of the most ordinary seeming substances. But what of a person? How do you place a value on a human being? His importance far exceeds that of all the bars of iron in the world. In his ability to know and his capacity to love, he transcends the value we place on things, but in the last analysis, it's the person himself who must determine his value to himself and his world. We know that in every young person there are all the necessary ingredients of greatness. The degree of greatness that he or she will ultimately achieve will depend only upon the extent to which the person develops and brings his or her real powers to bear. And in that way, can the person be compared to that bar of iron? The value of a piece of iron or a person depends upon what is made from the basic material. S.P. Sherman wrote, "In the days of one's youth, in one's period of apprenticeship, it is of far more importance to make oneself an effective instrument than it is to know precisely how or where the instrument is to be used. Temper the iron, sharpen the blade, and rest assured the world will use it." And Peter Drucker has pointed out that since we live in an age of innovation, a practical education must prepare a person for work that does not yet exist and cannot yet be clearly defined. It isn't necessary that we see the future too clearly. We need only do, to the best of our ability, that which we know we should be doing today, and realize that, in the scheme of things, our turn of the wheel will most certainly come around. It must be quite confusing to millions of young people in school in the complex world of today trying to decide what they'll ultimately do as adults. And while it's something to give a lot of thought to, it isn't anything to worry about if our preparation is made good. It's of far more importance to make oneself an effective instrument than it is to know precisely how or where the instrument is to be used. Temper the iron, sharpen the blade, and rest assured the world will use it. Quite often we find young people rebelling at school because, as they so often put it, I don't even know what I want to do. Regardless of what they ultimately choose to do, a good preparation will be necessary. Rather than being a reason for not continuing their education, not knowing what one wants to do as an adult is the best reason for making sure our education is adequate. And here's a good idea when you want to convince another person to follow your line of reasoning, especially when you're trying to sell something. It's called the feel-felt-found system of converting another to your way of thinking. Whenever the person throws up an objection to the point you're trying to make, say, I know how you feel. Others have felt the same way, until they found, and here you replace an objection with a positive benefit. I know how you feel. Now here you're empathizing and getting on the side of the other person. Others have felt the same way. Here you're not only agreeing with him, but bolstering his point and security by saying that others have felt the same way. Until they found that, and here you show them all the error of their ways, until they found that that was actually a real benefit in disguise because, and so on. Feel, felt, found. A way to get rid of objections without offending or turning off the person you're dealing with. Good with spouses and kids as well as with co-workers and prospects. I picked that up while listening to a lecture by my good friend Chris Haggerty. He also suggests that if you're in selling, and this is a great one to pass along to your salespeople, you should obtain and use every day 3 important items. 1, a cassette tape player. 2, a daily calendar of appointments. And 3, a stopwatch. All 3 will help you become aware of the structure of time. After every call, give a verbal summary of the call into the cassette tape recorder, including any promises you made, why you think the sale was made or lost, and so forth. This takes only a few minutes and should be done while the sales call is fresh in your mind. The daily calendar is self-explanatory, and the stopwatch will possibly for the first time show you exactly how much time you're spending in front of prospects. As you go in to see the person you're calling on, not his office or his secretary or receptionist, but as you actually go in to see the prospect, start the stopwatch. Stop it as you come out, and don't start it again until you're in front of another prospect. At the end of the day, you will have an accurate record of the time you've actually spent practicing your trade or profession. Chances are it'll be less time than you thought, and that you can find ways of increasing it. Some good points on the importance of time control. The only person who can afford to take off time to loaf is the well-organized person. A book that's been a favorite of mine for more years than I care to count is Kenneth Good's excellent book, How to Win What You Want. In it, Mr. Good gives a recipe for winning anything that I think you'll find of value. 1. If you work for anybody else, support your leader eagerly and without question until the time shall come to demonstrate to the advantage of both that you are, at some one point at least, smarter than he is. 2. If you work for yourself, start moving. Moving forward in a straight line. Keep moving forward along that line regardless of obstacles, weighing on its merits each advance as it arises. Don't confuse obstacles and objections. That is to say, don't consider that probable obstacles to finishing anything are possible objections to starting it. That difference in viewpoint may turn the balance between success and failure. There are at least 3 sound reasons for not stopping for anything until it stops you. 1, if the undertaking is never started, all the weary discussion about any obstacles will have been wasted. 2, when the difficulty of doing anything is advanced as an argument against going ahead, a wrong emotional and personal emphasis is likely to arise. 3, human judgment at best finds extraordinary difficulty in telling an obstacle from a blessing. Best and worst are so often the same. Viewed in the perspective of results, some disasters become veritable lifesavers, and some apparent lifesavers prove disastrous. Walter Hunt thought himself a magnificent businessman when he got $400 for an idea it had taken him only 3 hours to perfect. But he had sold out his patent rights to the safety pin. On the other hand, believe it or not, Ripley wanted to be a professional baseball pitcher, had a tryout with the New York Giants, broke his arm, and vastly disappointed, slid back into sports cartooning. His first timid believe it or not eased into the corner of a sporting cartoon the statement that Lindbergh was the 67th man to fly the Atlantic. That elicited thousands of letters, so Ripley, instead of shuttling back and forth from ball games, traveled the world 30,000 miles a year and made more money and had more fun than he would have believed possible before he broke his arm. So go slow in your acceptance of obstacles. Consider instead the worthwhileness of the goal, and how to steer the straight line to it. Avoid, of course, as even Napoleon and Nelson would avoid the higher impossibilities, but foresee as Napoleon would foresee, and override after your own best fashion and crush in advance the perpetual crop of dull reflex and reactionary can'ts and won'ts. Stick to the strong probability that every Alp has some way over or under or through or around it. I wonder how many good ideas, even great ideas, have been picked to death by committees or rendered stillborn by the fear of obstacles that could have been overcome one by one. Before you begin anything worthwhile, obstacles will swarm to confront you. If you start counting the obstacles, you'll never stop counting them. Once started, however, you won't stop to count. John W. Gardner has pointed out that the image created by those who live on the fringes of society and by most of their predecessors going back to the 19th century bohemians has led us to suppose that people of high originality are somehow lawless. But the truly creative man is not an outlaw, but a lawmaker. Every great creative performance since the initial one, he writes, has been in some measure a bringing of order out of chaos. It's a good quotation. Many people seem to believe that the most creative people are strange, neurotic, and eccentric, and live their lives on the outer edges of civilized society. It's not true. The truly creative person does not seek to destroy the existing order. It's the misfit who does that. The creative person simply tries to improve it. He's not a tearer down, he's a builder up. Moreover, the truly creative person tends to be rather conservative in his personal habits, in his dress, and his home. There are exceptions, of course, but for the most part, the most creative people in society would not stand out as being different in a room full of people. What the creative person does do is see things not as they are, but as they could be. He lives in that third language, the language of the hope, of the future, of the imagination. Nor are creative persons found in just a few fields, such as the arts, the theater, advertising, inventing, and so on. They're to be found in every field, every walk of life. Many of them earn their livelihoods through their creativity. Many more are creative just for the fun of it, or perhaps because they couldn't be any other way even if they wanted to. Far more people are genuinely creative than you might suspect. The great thing about using your mind creatively is that this ability improves with age. It's one of the great compensations for growing older. It's great, too, for young people, but every year of experience adds to the fund of possible combinations for new and better ideas. The recent, and to some extent the present, romper room era in the advertising business is really nothing new. Eric Hoffer has pointed out that throughout history the great creative geniuses and innovators have been quite young, and the graybeards who head various industries today were themselves tremendously creative when they were young and just getting started. And they're even more creative today if they haven't let the status quo sneak up on them and harden their channels of creativity. Nicholas Johnson is a commissioner of the Federal Communications Commission and author of an excellent book, How to Talk Back to Your Television Set, and an article which appeared in the July-August issue of The Humanist, titled TV and the Careening of America. In it, he reminds us that the general semanticist Alfred Korzybski described three categories of mental health: sane, insane, and unsane. His point was that most of us, while not insane, are unsane. That is, we're not living up to our potential as human beings. We're not fully functioning. The so-called human potential movement, including the late Abraham Maslow, argues that even the healthy human beings among us function at perhaps 5% of their potential. He then asks us to reflect and ask ourselves, how many people do I know, or better yet in his words, how many people do you know whom you think of as fully functioning personalities? How many are there in whose daily lives there's a measure of beauty, contact with nature, artistic creativity, some philosophical contemplation or religion, love, self-fulfilling productivity of some kind, participation in life support activities, physical well-being, a spirit of joy, and individual growth? That's what the world's great theologians, psychiatrists, poets, and philosophers have been telling us human life is all about. But few of us have come close to realizing that potential. Speaking of some of the problems of commercial television, Mr. Johnson later says, I've become more and more aware of the extent to which television not only distributes programs and sells products, but also preaches a general philosophy of life. Television tells us hour after gruesome hour that the primary measure of an individual's worth is his consumption of products, is measuring up to ideals that are found in packages mass-produced and distributed by corporate America. Many products and even programs, but especially the drug commercials, sell the gospel that there are instant solutions to life's most pressing personal problems. You don't need to think about your own emotional maturity and development of individuality, your discipline, training and education, your perception of the world, your willingness to cooperate and compromise and work with other people. You don't need to think about developing deep and meaningful human relationships and trying to keep them in repair. Not only do the programs and commercials explicitly preach materialism, conspicuous consumption, status consciousness, sexploitation, and fantasy worlds of quick, shallow solutions, but even the settings and subliminal messages are commercials for the consumption style of life. Look at the settings. Auto ads push clothes, fashion, and vacations. Furniture wax ads push wall-to-wall carpeting and draperies. Breakfast cereal ads push new stoves and refrigerators. Not surprisingly, the programs do the same. After all, they're paid for by the same guys who pay for the commercials. In fact, he writes, there's a rather intricate corporate interlock of jobs, products, and lifestyle. Once you come into the circle at any point, you take on nearly all of it. And once you're in it, it's very difficult to get a little bit out. The choices you're left are relatively meaningless, like which color and extras do you want with your Chevrolet, Scotch, or Bourbon, how mod your ties will be, and which toothpaste you'll use. It all fits. Corporate white-collar jobs, suburban home, commuting by automobile, eating in restaurants, and the clothes. There's the canned so-called entertainment of radio and television for boredom, bottled alcohol and aspirin for pain, and aerosol cans of deodorant and room freshener to maintain the antiseptic cleanliness of it all. You wear your office, your home, and your car as much as your clothes and deodorant, and from the corporate layers of externals comes your very identity and the smothering of your soul. Mr. Johnson goes on to say, I'd be the first to acknowledge that we are, of course, talking about matters of personal taste. People should be free to choose the life they want. Certainly it ought not to be the business of government to choose lifestyles for its citizens. But two facts remain. First, a wholly disproportionate, if not exclusive, emphasis of television pushing only one point of view. The choice you'll never know is the choice you'll never make. Many Americans are not sufficiently informed of the alternatives to make an intelligent choice of the life they most want. Second, independent students of our society, wholly apart from their own personal preferences, believe there's a correlation between the philosophy preached by television and many of our social problems. The gospel of television simultaneously seems to create tremendous anxiety and alienation in the poor and emptiness and neuroses in the affluent. As we're sold the products, we are given the belief that our world as individuals turns on our capacity to consume. We're given a shot of anxiety for free, told to buy more to make it go away, and find the feeling only gets worse. But apart from the content, the mere act of television watching is a passive activity. When we turn it on, we turn ourselves off. If it's true that passivity and a sense of powerlessness are among the most dangerous epidemics in our society today, the television set is suspect at the outset, regardless of what's programmed on it. Earlier in the article, Commissioner Johnson presents the sobering statistic that the average child will have received more hours of instruction by television by the time he enters first grade than he will later spend in college classrooms earning a BA degree. By the time he's a teenager, he will have spent 15,000 to 20,000 hours with the television set and will have been exposed to 250,000 to 500,000 commercials. It would seem simple common sense to assume that this exposure has its influence. In any event, since hard-headed businessmen are willing to bet $3 billion a year in advertising budgets on the proposition that it is having an effect, they are at least effectively stopped from arguing the contrary. In looking for answers, Commissioner Johnson says, I think television could and should help us understand the alternatives to the conspicuous consumption chemical corporate lifestyle. Not because I'm right, but because there are alternatives. People are entitled to know about them and experience them if they choose. And today's televised theology seems to be contributing very little to life or liberty or the pursuit of happiness, which somebody once thought was the business of government. Suppose you don't want to drop out or camp out. Maybe you want to step in, try to make things a little better, or just earn a living. What then? How can we make life in a corporate state more livable and more human? It became obvious to me, he wrote, that if I were going to criticize television for not offering alternative lifestyles, I'd have to be able to find the answer to that question. So I set about it. Camping in the West Virginia mountains for 2 weeks reaffirmed my latent but basic commitment to the psychic values of simplicity. You not only get along with substantially fewer things when camping in the woods, you actually enjoy life more because it's not so cluttered with objects. The experience gave me a way of thinking about simplicity, objects, and natural living that I had not had before, and it impressed upon me for perhaps the first time a sense of the interrelated totality of life support activities. By life support activities, I mean the provision of those things that are necessary to sustain physical life for ourselves: food, clothing, shelter, transportation, and so forth. These are the kinds of activities which I became most fully aware of in the woods because I had to, and because they can be most easily comprehended when reduced to their basics. And yet I used to give almost no attention to these kinds of activities. Food simply appeared on my dinner table ready to eat. The house I lived in was purchased. It was warmed or cooled by some equipment in the basement that I knew very little about, and was attended to by repairmen when necessary. Clothing was something I found in closets and dresser drawers. It was cleaned and mended by my wife, the maid, or a cleaning establishment. Transportation was provided by the municipal bus system for commuting and by FCC drivers during the day. At my office, I was not only surrounded by machinery, copying machines, electric typewriters, dictating machines, and so forth, but also by people paid to operate them for me, answer my telephone, and bring coffee. I had, in short, taken very nearly all my life support activities, my life, and cut them up into bits and pieces which I parceled out to individuals, corporations, and machines around me. The upshot was that there was very little of it left for me to live. This was extraordinarily efficient in one sense, that is, I was working at perhaps 99% of the ultimate level of professional production of which I'm capable. But what I concluded was that it was bad for life, for I was living only a small percentage of my ultimate capacity to live. In an industrialized urban environment, it's easy to forget that human life still is, as it was originally, sustained by certain basic functions. I think some participation in the support of your life is essential to a sense of fulfillment. I do not, however, think that you need to do everything for yourself. For one thing, you can't trace everything back to first elements. You can build your own furniture, but are you going to saw your own boards from your own trees? Are you going to insist on making your own nails from your own iron ore? Even the most deeply committed do-it-yourselfers reach some accommodation with civilization. In the second place, you simply don't have time to do it all. To raise and can all your own fruits and vegetables, for example, would take substantially more time per year than most people are prepared to give to it, especially if you're also personally constructing your own home, weaving your own material, and making your own clothes, and walking everywhere. In the third place, many conveniences of urbanized life are there anyway, and you might as well use them. They can save you time you might spend in other, more satisfying ways. There's no point to cooking in your fireplace every night or on your corporate cookout charcoal grill if you have a gas or electric range sitting in your kitchen. So my conclusion is, he writes, that you ought to try to do a little bit of all your life support activities, and a substantial amount of whichever one or two of them appeal to you the most and make the most practical sense for you. I've taken to buying and preparing my own simple foods, he writes, doing some modest mending of clothes, preparing some logs I intend to make into furniture, and providing my own transportation by bicycle. Undoubtedly other activities will fit better with your own life pattern. If you start looking around for simplification, ways to make you less possession-bound and give you more chance to participate in your life, the opportunities are endless. Start by searching your house or apartment for things to throw away. Ask yourself, if I were living in the woods, would I spend a day going to town to buy this aerosol can? Look for simple substitutes. Bicarbonate of soda, for example, can substitute for the following products: toothpaste, gargle and mouthwash, burn ointment, stomach settlers, room freshener, icebox cleaner, children's clay, baking powder, and so forth. And it only costs 12 cents a box. Get the idea? Yes, we get the idea. He explains that the point is to find your own soul and kick it and poke it with a stick, see if it's still alive, and then watch which way it moves. Makes sense, doesn't it? In returning to Earth, in trying to find our real selves and to determine what's really important and what isn't, that's exactly what we need to do. We need to find our own souls and kick them and poke them with a stick and see if they're still alive, and then watch which way they move. That's the way to heed Socrates' advice, know thyself. I can recommend that you buy and read Commissioner Johnson's book, How to Talk Back to Your Television Set, and his newer book, How to Talk Back to Your Corporate State, both available in Bantam paperbacks. Commissioner Johnson leaves no doubt in anyone's mind that he's against big business and the big corporation. I don't agree with him on that theme. I don't think big necessarily means bad, and some of our largest corporations are model world citizens and are not in the least interested in conning the consumer. But reading him is important, because it keeps us from assuming that everything is all right. It lets us see the other side of the argument, the side we won't often see watching television. And reading him makes us realize that there's much to living that we're perhaps missing. The tendency is always to join the mob, and it's not the way to life, maturity, and fulfillment. As he points out, the choice you will never know is the choice you'll never make. In his summary and conclusion in the article in The Humanist, he warns, there are many researchers and writers in this country who know far more psychiatry and political science than I do, and they report that we are in serious danger as a people. They predicted the social disintegration we are now experiencing some 10 or 20 years before it happened. The nervous breakdowns and mental illness, the alcoholism and drug addiction, the unwanted illegitimacy and divorce rates, the crime and the violence. They told us that these symptoms would occur because human beings have to be able to grow and develop as individuals, that they need whole lives in which love, productivity, dignity, and creativity can play a daily role. They say if people do not lead full and whole lives, they will not only suffer as individuals, but will make a society that is bad for everyone else. In other words, the quality of life does not just mean getting the smoke out of the air. That's necessary for us as animals. Pollution is as bad for cows and citrus trees as it is for people. But the quality of life for human beings has to do with the smog inside our minds. The same people who are putting the garbage in the air are putting the garbage in our heads. I have hope, he concludes, we may have begun to evolve the tactics for talking back to our corporate state. I welcome your interest and support, for we are talking about nothing less precious than your life and mine, and I can add, even more important than that, the lives of our kids. He's right that if people do not lead full and whole lives, they'll get sick, and their sickness will spread to those about them. It can be seen on every side, don't you agree? There are diseases and conditions brought about by malnutrition where the body is concerned. They develop because of a lack of something vital in our diet. The same can be said of our mental and emotional diet. The lack of a vital kind of information can make us sick. As Alfred Korzybski put it, there are three kinds of mental health: sane, insane, and unsane, and each of us needs to determine where he stands with reference to those three conditions. We may not be insane, we may be productive members of society, but still be unsane in that we do not have a well-balanced fund of information on which to make meaningful and positive decisions. And one of the main purposes of this Direct Line program is to make sure we're getting a good balance of information. Let me close Direct Line 3 with that quotation of Emerson's. Our life might be much easier and simpler than we make it. The world might be a happier place than it is. There's no need of struggles and convulsions and despairs or the wringing of the hands and the gnashing of the teeth. We miscreate our own evils. We interfere with nature. He said, there is one direction in which all space is open to us. Each of us has faculties silently inviting him in that direction to endless exertion. He's like a ship in a river. He runs against obstructions on every side but one. On that side, all obstruction is taken away, and he sweeps serenely over a deepening channel into an infinite sea.